Just testing. Porter here.
No, not a word.
Excellent. That's what I want to know.
There'll be no one listening. There'll be no one listening to you anyway. So you might.
Oh, I know that. I know that. That's obvious. We'll leave it at that. I'm on mute.
So we're just going to let the public in, just to let you know.
You'll get her hair in place and your pants and all.
Hair on.
Hair on and teeth in.
Just testing, David. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Afternoon, everybody.
Please wait.
You touch the brackets with his hand.
Do you want any, Jason?
No.
Good afternoon, members. So we're just going to start the meeting now. If that suits, if that's okay with everybody, we have a quorum, so we're just about to start. I'll go through the key directions as usual, and then we will just head over. We're going to be recommencing with Gormanston. So it's all participants must have their camera on during the meeting, and you should have your microphone on mute at all times unless called upon by the Cathaoirleach to speak. It is the personal responsibility of all participants to ensure that there are no other persons present who are not entitled to be present for this meeting. Recording of the meeting or any part thereof is not permitted. No member of the public should attempt to speak or interrupt the meeting or interact with members of the council during the meeting. You must observe a direction given by the Cathaoirleach or council official, and failure to follow any direction given may result in exclusion from the meeting. For members, if you wish to speak, you should use your hand function. You'll be given the floor by the Cathaoirleach. And this hand function will also be used for voting unless a roll call is being used. Is everyone clear enough on that? Okay, so as promised, we will be recommencing with Gormanston settlement. So I'll hand you over to Alan, I think, for the, to Sean for our statutory obligations. Yes, sorry, apologies. Sean.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Thought you were forgetting me there. I had this important part that you all know at this stage anyway. In relation to your ethical framework for local government services, code of conduct for councillors, you are individually responsible for being compliant with the same, and it's an offence if you fail to comply with some sections of the ethical framework. When a matter comes before a meeting for consideration where you are connected or have a beneficial interest, you must disclose the nature of that beneficial interest before discussion or consideration of the matter, and you must physically absent yourself from the meeting, and the disclosure in your absence will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting, and you should also advise the council's ethics registrar in writing after the meeting. The disclosure in advance of a meeting, should you not be present at a meeting again, you should make your disclosure in writing and furnish it to the council's ethics registrar in advance of the meeting. Again, the disclosure will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Members, in making a development plan, you shall be restricted to considering the proper planning and sustainable development to the area of which the plan relates and to the statutory obligations of any local authority in the area and any relevant policies or objectives for the time being for the government or and minister of the government. And again, just to reiterate, meetings should not be recorded by anyone other than the meeting administrator. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. We hand you over to Alan now to give us the overview of Gormanston.
Yes, thank you, Cathaoirleach. So I just have the zoning map for the draft plan zoning map for Gormanston up on the screen there. So in relation to Gormanston, the village has developed in a linear pattern along the approach roads and around Gormanston College grounds and the castle domain. The existing dwellings consist mainly of one-off detached houses, and the area has remained essentially rural in character. Gormanston Castle Domain which is in use as a school and playing fields, occupies a large portion of the plan area. Little development has taken place in the area in recent years, and there are relatively few services for the existing population. The aim of the land use strategy is to consolidate and strengthen the settlement. The core strategy of the County Development Plan seeks to provide for the natural growth in a sustainable manner, which is integrated within the village's existing built environment. There is one site zoned for A2 new residential use, which is 2.1 hectares in size and located at the centre of the village. There are also infill opportunities on the A1 existing residential lands, which are located to the east of the village also. Regarding the linear walkway, there is an objective, Gormanston Objective 8, to develop a river linear walkway along the Delvin River to the south of the village in the area I'm highlighting there. There is no public Irish water sewer network or wastewater treatment plant serving Gormanston, and there are no Irish water proposals to provide a wastewater scheme for Gormanston within the plan period. It is also important to note that there were 103 submissions in the Gormanston group submission, which was group submission number 8. The submission welcomed the intention from the County Development Plan to preserve the rural nature and environment of Gormanston in the draft plan by limiting the land available for development. So in summary, the development strategy for Gormanston is to consolidate and preserve the village core and encourage organic growth that will contribute to the character and structure of the village and enhance the quality of the village's attractive built and natural environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And we'll go back to Sean just to give an overview of the submissions and notice of motion.
Sean, I'm coming in there.
Okay, here, Padraig's just going to come in before I give you an overview. Thank you.
Okay, look.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Chair. I just want to, as part of the overview for Gormanston, there are a lot of, there's been a lot of submissions. There's a number of motions, notices of motion, both in the book and from the floor. And I just want to provide an overview of what's in the book and what the gist of the motions are. So I'll get Alan to bring up a map just on screen there that kind of summarizes the key motions referring to the zoning of land. So in the current development plan, Gormanston had a legacy zoning of phase 2 residential, which dates back to the early 2000s. We will see that in a number of notices of motion, which refers to retention of zoning. Like all tier 5 and 6 settlements, the vast majority of this phase 2 residential was removed in the draft plan that went on public display early last year. Though, like the other villages and in Gormanston, those lands were considered inappropriate, not necessary, and a legacy zoning not required for the current settlement strategy. The map on screen summarises all the A2 zoning for Gormanston in the plan period that comes forward in the submissions and notices of motion. These lands will be discussed today through the submissions and notices of motion. Note the gaps on the map which are not proposed for discussion and zoning, which means there's very much an ad hoc approach to development in the village. And obviously this is very much to be discouraged. It's also very important to note that we have received 103 submissions from community groups and local people. And this is in fact the highest number of submissions received in all of the lower tier settlements. Virtually all of the submissions, with the exception of those seeking zoning, stated that they're very much opposed to the whole-scale proposed residential growth and development in this village. And as Alan just outlined, it's about consolidation and catch-up. Of note is the fact that there were 2 proposed SHDs in Gormanston for 2 companies named Swan Hall and Malach Hall on lands that could potentially accommodate up to 8,000 units. There were 2 pre-planning meetings held with those companies in November 2018 and April 2019. Neither scheme progressed through the SHD process to on board Planola, and that would have been based on the facts which were emerging regarding servicing and other issues, particularly planning policy issues and the zoning of lands. So the key facts for Gormanston is that it is a tier 6 village where it is considered completely inappropriate for the development of circa 48 acres of A2 new residential zoning that could potentially deliver over 1,000 units. Only organic growth should be encouraged and facilitated within the urban footprint that's there at the moment. So it's a focus of consolidation, like all settlements in East Meath. Under the NPF or SES and the settlement strategy of this plan, the majority of future growth for this part of East Meath will be in the larger, higher order settlements of Drogheda, Duleek, and to a lesser extent, Stamullen. Members should note that the proper consideration and decisions were taken already on submissions in East Meath, and I refer to Bettystown, Laytown, Donacarney, and Mornington, where proper planning and consistent decisions were taken in terms of the consolidation of growth and to allow community and infrastructure development to happen in response to the residential sprawl that occurred over recent decades. We cannot see a repeat of this sprawl in a Tier 6 settlement such as Gormanston. Currently, there is no network or capacity for public sewer or water in Gormanston. There are currently no supporting services, amenities, service provision, or other facilities that could support this scale of development. The core strategy of the draft Meath County Development Plan states that, and I quote, "The prioritisation phasing of residential lands will only be utilised in the larger settlements where population growth is to be concentrated, i.e. regional growth centre, key town, or self-sustaining growth towns, where there are fundamental reasons to support the requirement to phase such lands." As this section has already been adopted as part of the meetings on the draft plan, the zoning of any additional lands in Gormanston would contradict this approach that has already been adopted. I should also state that post-2027 lands are considered wholly inappropriate in all Tier 5 and 6 villages, as they're currently only located on lands identified in higher order settlements, and the settlements where there are only post-2027 include Dunboyne, Navan, Dunshaughlin, Enfield and Kilcock. Finally, the Executive urges extreme caution to members today in terms of any additional residential zoning in Gormanston, as it is in direct conflict with our own settlement and core strategy, or SES and NPF, and would therefore not be consistent with Section 10 of the Planning and Development Act. And I'll just hand you over, I think, to Jerry Boyle, who wants to provide us with an update on the water services, an Irish water update. Thank you.
Thanks, Pádraig. I hope you can all hear me there. Yeah, I think as Alan outlined there at the start, I suppose just, and you probably will be aware from the written statement that we would have provided late last year as part of this process, that Gormanston, in terms of water, is on the very periphery of the East Meath scheme. It's connected by a very small diameter pipeline that is really just intended and suitable for supplying the current development and some further small-scale development, but certainly wouldn't be capable of supplying the lands that are shown on the screen. In terms of excuse me, sewage scheme, there is no wastewater sewage facility or network treatment plant in Gormanston whatsoever. And there is no proposal to provide such by Irish Water. Any development that's existing in the village, predominantly one-off housing, all have their own septic tanks, and that's the way I suppose any future infill development would have to go forward. Corey did mention SHD developments, and yes, as part of that process, obviously there were pre-connection inquiries made. We would have processed them on behalf of Irish Water. And on foot of those, the developers have entered into what's called a PWSA, which is kind of an agreement with Irish Water whereby they are funding an assessment to be carried out to see how the village might be served in terms of water and wastewater into the future, to facilitate development on the scale that's being suggested. That assessment is ongoing, and we believe is due for conclusion in the coming months. We think that will suggests that obviously, as in most issues, technically it would be possible to address the problem, but it would require very, very substantial infrastructure, both particularly on the water side, but also on the wastewater side. And they would take several years to develop and would cost many millions to develop, none of which would be funded by Irish Water. And maybe just a final point I'd make on it, again, we would have, I suppose, highlighted it previously in different fora with regard to water in particular. A big chunk of the east of Meath is supplied by one scheme with a single source coming from the Stalleen plant. There is a finite supply of water there, and any additional water that is sent, or any water that is sent in a new direction, every gallon that we send in a new direction is a gallon less that we have for Drogheda, that we have for the whole East Meath, Duleek, Ashburn, Ratoath, Kentstown, Stamullen, and everywhere in between. So that is something that certainly we, as the operator of this system, would be very conscious of, and we would ask you to bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So we just go to Sean for the overview of the submissions and notice of motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. In relation to Gormanston, we received 8 submissions, 8 of which no change has been recommended. There are 5 notices of motion within the book dated October 2020, and there are 3 notices of motions from the floor.
Thank you. So bearing all that in mind, we're going to go to the book first, obviously, for the notice of motions. Now, it is my intention to take a number of these motions together with your agreement, just to, because they are related to the same topic. And they are notice of motion 169, 170, 171, 175, and notice of motion 3 from the floor. So they are in the names of Councillor Tormey. It's 169, 170, 175. Councillor Aisling O'Neill, 171, and Councillor Amanda Smith, notice of motion 3. So if we could just go back to the page, sorry, the main, the voting page, for what we call it first, just initially, just to discuss this, to make sure that we have agreement from the chamber that that is something that we can do. And then there's a number of technical things we need to do, and then we can progress. So is Councillor Tormey, are you in agreement that we do as suggested?
I was going to suggest some of them, but I don't think 175 is related to this. This is a different landowner, isn't it?
So again, we just, if we get clarification on that, it's listed as that.
Here, look, it's not in relation to the landowner, it's just in relation to the intent of the motion. The motion refers to rezoning of A2 land. So it's more that they're based on the intent of the motions, that they're being grouped together. Thank you.
Yeah, I would rather do 169 and 171 together and leave 175 separate. If that's possible, Chairman.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. We can discuss that, absolutely. So, and Councillor, sorry,
I probably won't go through anyway. If 175, if the others don't happen, sure, I won't be pushing with 175 then. So we'll just do the other ones first.
Okay, look, that's no problem. Councillor O'Neill, are you happy enough that we take 171?
I'm not sure Councillor O'Neill is with us today.
Okay, so we can't take that motion. There's been no correspondence. There's been no formal correspondence that anybody else has been approved to move that motion.
No, she's called into work, Chairman. I know that.
Okay, sorry, it's just one moment, please. I'm just going to go through a series of I'm going to ask a series of questions. I'm going to establish a series of facts, and then we can discuss it. Okay.
I just wanted to give you some clarification. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So just
it may or may not help.
Just one moment, please. So with regards to our ability to take these motions, that's what I'm at the moment. So
that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Yes. So Councillor Aisling O'Neill has not formally, her presence is her own business, but there's been formally no correspondence to say that anyone else can move her motion. So in that regard, what I'm trying to explain is that we can't table her motion. So that's
what I'm trying to say to you, sorry, is I as far as I was concerned, she had withdrawn it rather than it's fallen. Robert might seek clarification on that from her.
There is no clarification at this moment in time. All we can speak about is at this moment in time and what we formally received. So again, everyone's okay. Everyone understands the fact we cannot take notice of motion 171. Okay. Now, notice of motion from the floor, number 3 from Councillor Smith. Are you happy for us to discuss that at this moment underneath, or as part of a group of notice of motions?
No, not as part, because I was hoping, with your permission, I could make an amendment on it. So if I could leave that one separate.
Well, the amendment will, yeah, sure, we'll leave that separate. So we'll come to that separately as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take notice of motion 169, 170 together. Is that agreed? 171 falls. Okay, anybody not clear on what we're going to just about to embark on? Okay, so notice of motion 169, Councillor Tormey, we need a seconder for that motion. Can we just leave the other page, if we could just leave the other page up until we move to the motions, because we just have to go through. So Councillor Damien O'Reilly, and notice of motion 170. I could have a seconder for that motion, Councillor Smith. Okay, thank you very much. So now we're going to go to the notice of motion 169 and 170. Councillor Tormey.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I just have a little bit on this, so I'll read it out. We've heard a good bit on it already. 9 years ago in 2012, the site was zoned residential and included in the Meath County Development Plan 2013-2019 to provide for sustainable, compact and enhancing the growth and development of Gormanston Village. The location is sustainable because of its proximity to existing physical, social and commercial infrastructure. It is within walking distance of Gormanston rail station. It's on the Dublin-Belfast Railway, which is included for upgrading in the capital programme for the Dart extension. It's adjacent to the M1 motorway. It's on the Dublin-Belfast Economic Corridor, and it has great public transport access employment hubs to Drogheda, Balbriggan, Dublin Airport and Swords. Has excellent education, sport and community facilities at Gormanston College. It's beside the beach with ample open space for walks and views. And we have very few locations in our great county that can boast such an amazing beach. The site is unique and characteristic in that I don't know of any other parcel of land in the county that has so many sustainable features and located within walking distance of Gormanston rail station and satisfying so many good planning criteria. With the wisdom of many of the councillors here today, this site was earmarked for phased development in post-2019. It was phased in order to provide for water and foul water services. And in the intervening 9 years, over 1 million has been spent on studies, surveys, route planning, involving numerous of meetings with Irish Water, environmentalists, Department of Meath, Fingal and Louth County Councils. This included an excess of €750,000 of a financial contribution from the landowner directly to Irish Water towards the provision of water and foul services, together with the landowner providing land for the pumping station on their lands. And this work, I'm led to believe, is well advanced and ready to take to the next stage. I believe it would be reckless and foolish to abandon such a site now after such a large major investment. I believe appropriate residential development will allow for the increased usage of existing public transport in compliance with the National Planning Framework. This site can easily accommodate ancillary community services and local retail, thus supporting the National Planning Framework provision for community infrastructure. The development of this site will provide for the provision of Irish water infrastructure for the benefit and immediate wider area, including the village of Themullen. The site is ready to provide affordable family homes at a sustainable location at a time of a housing crisis both nationally and locally. The National Planning Strategy, which I support, was prepared in 2018, which was pre-COVID-19, pre our lockdowns, and pre-people working from home, which is now a national government policy. This strategy will now be amended to take into consideration these changed realities and their impact on family, community, and life in general. This residential site was sustainable in 2013. I believe it is sustainable today. And just to remind people, it's beside the rail station, beside Gormanston College, the M1 motorway, the beaches, and many jobs locally. So I'll ask the members to support my motion here today. Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Councillor. You should go back to the Chief Executive for a response.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would refer members to the assessments in their booklet on the norms 250 on pages 250, 251, 252 and 253, where in detail and for the minute of the meeting, I am highlighting all the reasons why these lands should not be zoned. I also refer to my previous comments, which give an overview of Gormanston. And suffice to state that the development of further lands at this location are anything but sustainable. The reality is they are contrary to the National Planning Framework, the RSES, and indeed our own core strategy and settlement strategy. As I highlighted, the key areas for development in East Meath are the existing settlements and not a small village. I think it's important to note also that many members of the public have tried to contact the executive, highlighting concerns, but we referred them to this forum, which is a member's reserved function to decide whether to zone these lands or not. I'm highlighting it for the purposes that when there are a lot of concerned residents here who have been trying to contact us, this is the appropriate forum. And I think it's important that we highlight why these lands should not be zoned because of all the servicing reasons as outlined, and the fact that it is not consistent with all the other decisions we have been making on the development plan. So I will leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Tobin.
Thanks, Ciarán, for the opportunity to speak. And I'll go back to, I think it was a day or two. I know Michelle was still in hospital at the time, but little Mia was born, and I had a county development plan meeting in Gormanston College in a little auditorium with the Gormanston Community Association, who organised it. And of the 9 meetings I had about the county development plan within the Ashbourne local or municipal district, I think Gormanston was, well, it was the biggest per head of population anyway, that of people that turned up. There was over 50 people at that meeting, every one of them concerned with the development or the potential of development within the Gormanston area. For any of you that haven't been there, we in the Ashbourne Municipal District have 3 kilometres of beach along the Ashbourne Municipal District, and the Gormanston Community Association once a month in the winter time and more often in the summertime they do litter collections, litter picks along the area there. The Delvin River runs through Stamullen and down through into the Irish Sea just beside the railway station there in Gormanston, and is basically an unspoiled piece of coastline that we should be proud to have within our county. And along the east coast there are very few areas within that M1 corridor that are unspoiled and they're not developed on or anything like that. It's a unique habitat. We have many studies done on it, on various different things to do with the wildlife, the flora and fauna along that area there, and it should be something that should be protected. There are areas further north that are SACs and SPAs, which means specific or areas of specific conservation and protection, in particular up along Bettystown and around the Boyne and stuff like that. This area here should actually be a part of it as well. But the area itself, with the community, they want to realise, I suppose, the kind of tourism potential that's there. They don't want it developed in the way that we want to see, or the way that this motion wants to see it developed, and other motions that are to come down the line as well. The area, if you look at the statistics on it, there's 121 units in Gormanston, and Padraig is just after saying to us there that if those 48 acres were zoned, that has the potential for 1,000 units. All right, so you're basically what people are being asked today here is that if they support this motion, they're asking for Gormanston's population to increase 10 times, tenfold what it is now. All right, and nothing, absolutely nothing that was mentioned by Councillor Tormey was in any way an addition amenity-wise to Gormanston. So everything that was mentioned is already existing there. Now, the Gormanston Park over the last few years took over Gormanston College, and I remember being at the meeting at it, and they had always said there was going to be public access to it. They have since closed off pitches, and they've closed off the walking areas there to the public. So Gormanston Park is now off limits. The railway station, we know, and people who are in the Ashbourne MD would know, is not fully utilised because people in Stamullen don't use it. They go up to Balbriggan to get cheaper rail fares. And that's been an issue and a bugbear of ours, where we're trying to get similar fare structures in Gormanston so that people will utilise that. But there's no talk here of like the likes of a master plan. We saw some plans that were given to us, posted out to us and stuff like that by the people who own the land. And those people who own that land were advised not to buy it because the infrastructure wasn't there and there was no intention to put the infrastructure in. And the thing about it is that if something like this was to go ahead, and if we were to look at the plans that were given to us, the only additions to the area would be things that would be planning conditions anyway. And that was creches and a couple of playgrounds. I mean, that's what we put in any development anywhere. So I had always said it to the community of Gormanston that there was never ever going to be anything additional for the people who live in Gormanston. And I just would ask you to reflect on your own areas. In no other area in County Meath have we inflicted something like this on a community, something so big that it increases the population tenfold. And the population of Gormanston between the 2016 and 2011 census actually reduced. It didn't increase. So there's many, many other things there that I'll talk about, and I'll talk about them on some of the other things that are coming in. We were talking about, just to finalize, we were talking about jobs. What we will create here is what we don't want to create and replicate across the rest of the county. We don't want to create bed and breakfasts in a suburb of Dublin, and that's exactly what that's going to do. If you look at where it is, you have to travel to the jobs. There are no jobs in Gormanston, so jobs isn't really a one that I would say is a strong point there. And within Gormanston, there's no other zoning for retail or mixed town centre zoning, or for enterprise, strategic enterprise, or anything like that. So there's absolutely, if this was to go ahead, there's no potential there for Gormanston to become a self-sustaining village or town or anything like that. And don't forget, it's tier 6. It's essentially rural. So that's basically what I want to say. And the other thing that I want to make, and I think it's a very strong point. In any of the other areas where we were going to change or have a change and put residential into an area, we took away from somewhere else. In this particular case, we're not taking away from somewhere else. So I don't see how this can even pass the likes of the OPR or anything like that. As I said, this was, per head of population, the biggest area where submissions came in. The people don't want it. We are representatives of the people, not of the developers, of the people. And I'm asking my fellow councillors to please not support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Paddy Mead.
Thank you, Cahirla. I think it's a very interesting debate, and there's complexities within complexities, and the way one town impacts on another. And I suppose, while I don't represent the district that this site is in, I just represent one that's beside it. And if people can remember, in my opinion, we shouldn't have zoned near as much land in South Drogheda as we did. That was my strong opinion. I wish to unzone that land. But there wasn't, we didn't have Irish Water telling us about Stalin on them days. We didn't have the same pushback from the executive them days, because they were in favour of that, whereas I was against. And that will have a serious impact in my area, where thousands of more houses are going to be built in an area, which there is lines drawn in maps, but to me, that was rural Denor and everything's like that. And that will have an impact on this, because if we hadn't have zoned all of that, you would have more residential zoning. So we should remember that. The other thing I think is interesting is when we look around a lot of our towns and villages, there's places, and let's be clear, I don't think to date I have backed any proposed zone of residential land, or maybe once or two, but not to the main part. But when we look around a lot of our towns and villages, and there's places where we want to add in a little bit of zoning, for the most part, this has been knocked. And one of the big reasons it appears to me why this has been knocked is because there was a big strategy to get the train line to Navan, and to do that, we're boosting residential zoning in Navan and in Shopton, which are along the train line. Yet, if that is a strategy, and that is how much we think of a train line, Well, there is a train line in Gormanston. On the logic that seems to be knocking so many of us in towns and villages all across this county, because to get the train line to Navan, if that is really our strong logic, on that logic, then Gormanston should be really being built up, because that's the logic that is knocking us everywhere else. As I say, like whoever owns this land here, I don't know where he is from. I don't know where he lives, but you know, there's strong logic there that we're using one argument on one side of town or county, and then we're using the opposite here. So I think they are principal points, and they are important, because it's been with that logic we've been knocking everywhere else. Now, as it happens, look, we all have about 2 or 3 screens in front of us. We can see, so, well, some of us are in communication, so we know the lead parties appear to be against this. So it's that for some, and delight for others, this motion, or most of the motions today, won't get passed. We're getting an indication that even if the motion does get passed, the OPR will reject it. But my points are still valid, and that's why I bring them into today's debate, and there is justification behind them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That is a fair point. Some of your points are valid, but the ones you cannot be preempting other people's feelings or contributions that are yet to be made. It's important that you reflect only what your own feelings are, and not feelings that are yet to be expressed publicly anyway. Councillor Smith. Councillor, you're muted there, please. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Apologies. Thank you, Caherlick. I agree with Alan there. I mean, I would not like to see, under no circumstances, Gormanston developed in a huge scale. But this particular site, I would support this motion for this particular site because it would have to deliver appropriate style development, because the Cromwell's Avenue is an historical avenue. It's protected. It's if you look at the map, you'll see that a big long strip of land going through it. That is Cromwell's Avenue, and that's protected. So anything that would be built around that would have to be appropriate style development. And I think this, because it's in the centre of the village, to see this open. I mean, the avenue is very historical. It's in the 1600s, Oliver Cromwell would have used the avenue when he landed at Gormanston Shore on his way to Drogheda. He would have came up through that way. But protecting that site would be, having the site open would be a huge amenity for the residents in Gormanston. It's right in the centre. It would enhance the core of the village. It would also provide footpaths, lighting, which is an objective of the written statement for Gormanston. I think it's OBJ 4, 7 and 3. And also it would be safe access to the beach and the railway station there. And also, I believe there would be community gain also for a local group. So for this reason, I would support this motion. Thank you, Caherlick. Thank you, Councillor.
It's not too often you hear Oliver Cromwell used as a positive in this country, so it's an interesting view of it. Councillor Murphy. If you could unmute yourself, please, Councillor.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to hit that button. Thank you, Caherlick. What I'm going to say on this is I'm totally opposed to this motion and the other motions, or anything that's requesting that some of these former zone sites be put back in play within the life of our current plan. To me, the first thing that jumped out at me when Porrick put up the map with all the different sites zoned and the size of them is that these sites taken together if we were to take the same decision on them all and return them all to zoned within the life of the plan, it would mean we would have more residential land zoned in Gormanston than in Dunboyne. Now, that to me would be a disaster for Gormanston as a village. Porrick has told us where it's at, you know, as a village. We formally talked about it. It's placed in the RSES. It's not designated to grow. There's no plans for main water or sewage. And to me, this would be crazy. What I'd also like to say is that we've been told about our legal responsibilities and obligations as councillors in this plan. And I do think we need to be consistent. If we make a decision on this particular zone site, we should be conscious of our legal obligations, because how can we choose one site over another within the same settlement? They are all very closely aligned along that one side of Gormanston. And that to me, you know, it's like putting one site over another, regardless of what Councillor Tormey said in relation to the investment that was put into it already. I would be totally opposed to the zoning on this site and any of the other sites that we're going to discuss today in Gormanston. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jamal.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I have a question going back to something that Councillor Tormey mentioned there. You mentioned a figure of 1 million being spent and a landowner spending 750,000 to resolve the issue of water infrastructure. It's my understanding, listening to Padraig, that wastewater is a huge issue, but how can I ask maybe perhaps Jerry Boyle to elaborate on that 1 million being spent, and how would it resolve, you know, the issue? If we were to support this motion today, how would that resolve this issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll come to Jerry at the end. We have one more speaker, Councillor Tolan, and then we can address, we can respond, and then we go to Councillor Tormey.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. And I suppose just to start by saying, I grew up just down the road in Balbriggan, and Gormanston Beach was the beach I swam on every summer. You know, I think to present an argument in relation to the rail line and Gormanston is a bit of an anomaly, to say the least. You know, that the Gormanston train station there was really only set up as a train station for access to the army camp. And certainly any of those sites identified there, they're on the wrong side of the main road, first of all, and you would still need to drive to the train station, which is not fit for purpose for the cars that currently use it, never mind trying to increase the residents in the area to use it. Notwithstanding the fact that Councillor Tobin has outlined the fair process, the fair problem, and our I suppose our lobbying.
Yeah, I think so too.
Fares for further out from Balbriggan. The capacity at Gormanston train station is just, it's non-existent, to be fair. It is a village. If you could even call it a village as such, there's such a village community and spirit there. But I mean, as you can see, it is a row of homes who do an awful lot of work in their community to keep the village spirit going, to increase the residential capacity by the amount that's being presented here today. It's like a free-for-all looking at that map. It would make it a very, very large town. I suppose I'd like Padraig to outline exactly how many units would fit on all of those notice of motions, because, as I said, you know, the village there with Gibney's as the only town centre, I see zoning. Look, I'll be totally opposed to this motion. I think it's the wrong location to grow at such a high residential rate in an area that is so rural and really needs to be preserved and protected. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So we'll go back to planning for a response to those questions, and then we'll return to Councillor Tormey, and then we'll go to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll maybe answer what questions I can, and then I'll refer to Jerry Boyle, particularly regarding the Irish water question. I suppose Councillor Mead asked a direct question: why was all the advice available today and not available for Drogheda? It has always been available, but what I would say is that Drogheda is a regional growth centre, and Councillor Mead sits on the regional assembly, so he should be well aware of the planning hierarchy and the importance of Drogheda relative to Gormanston. Navan, Drogheda, the rail line, I think, is a discussion. You can make arguments this way or that way, but I think Councillor Tolan has referred to the current station at Gormanston and its role and function, and how it is not appropriate for this level of development that's proposed here. And then there are particular issues crossing a very busy road and then getting footpaths up to the rail station. So there's all sorts of logistical issues. Finally, in terms of the question, just how many units you're talking about, there's 48. The reason we put that map up on is to sort of assist members to see the scale of the proposals, and the figures are quoted there. There is approximately 48 acres, sorry, just over 19 hectares in total of land zoned, which potentially could provide over 1,000 units. And that's based on the facts of the SHDs, which were being brought forward at that time in 2018-19, and the figures from the two companies. So there is certainly an excess of potential for 1,000 units, which we consider wholly inappropriate. I'll maybe pass you, I hope that answers most of the questions raised there, and I'll pass you over to Jerry Boyle just to clarify the issues regarding water services. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Porrick. Yeah, Councillor Jamal, you queried a figure of 1 million that had been put forward by Councillor Tormey. I wouldn't have any knowledge of such a figure. I wouldn't obviously be aware of what landowners privately may have spent with their own agents and consultants in relation to all of this. The only thing I would be aware of is the study that they have requested Irish Water to undertake, which they are funding. That would certainly be an awful lot less than that. And the latest figures I've seen on that, somewhere maybe about 150,000 or thereabouts is what was actually spent to date, but some work is ongoing on that project, and that will be concluded. And that's only on assessments and studies and looking at possibly what solutions might be. As I mentioned earlier, whatever comes out of the assessment, one thing is for certain: it will require very extensive engineering solutions to be put in place, which will cost several millions and will cost several years to, or take several years to realise. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's just worth repeating it. All of the water comes from Stilleen. There are no proposals within the life of this plant, or sorry, the life of this plan, to further expand or upgrade the amount of water coming from Stilleen. So every gallon that would be sent to this area, if that was done, would be a gallon less for Ashburn, Ratoath, Deleek, Dunor, South Drogheda, Stamullen, the coastal region, and everywhere in between. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We return to Councillor Tormey now.
All right, Chairman. Yeah, just a couple of quick ones then on this. In relation to Councillor Jamal, the £1 million question, is my information that the motions I'm dealing with now, they paid 750,000, and that the other landowner of 175 motion, they paid 250,000. So that's my information. That's where the 1 million come out of. I think in relation to a lot of the questions.
Sorry, Councillor, just for our own clarification, to who did they pay this money? That's just so we understand who the money was paid.
Irish Water. I did say that earlier, yeah.
Okay, just for my own information. Sorry, thank you.
Okay. And I believe a lot of the questions that were asked today could be dealt with planning applications. The planners, when they're dealing with other planning applications, can put whatever conditions in, and I don't see why this can't be dealt with under planning applications. Can I ask one legal question, Chairman, probably of Rory, in relation to, and I know the councillors have it in their power to dezone lands, but in the case where somebody has spent so much money after having meetings with public bodies and that, are we leaving ourselves open, because it is our plan after all, are we leaving ourselves open for compensation? And if we are, will the executive exempt us from such claims? Thanks, Chairman, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. We might go to Rory on this first with that specific question. Might just remind us of, this question did come up a number of times in the past, so we might just remind ourselves of the answer we received. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Caherlock and members. Just before I answer that last question, I think I should refer to something that Councillor Murphy mentioned. We have to be mindful of our legal obligations, and we have gone through these a number of times. We have responsibilities with regard to national region policy, etc. But specifically, we have adopted a core strategy, and we have a legal obligation to ensure that our development plan is consistent with that core strategy. Now, the professional advice that I've listened to this afternoon is telling us that this proposal wouldn't be consistent. I would reiterate, we have statutory and legal obligation to be consistent. Then dealing specifically with Councillor Tormey, and the issue he's raising is one what's referred to in legal terms as legitimate expectation, as to whether an individual would be deemed to have a legitimate expectation that, having engaged with authorities and spent money, that their lands would be treated in a particular way. Clearly, the statutory framework that we're operating under provides that there is no such thing as a guarantee of future zoning of land. Just because you might have had land zoned previously doesn't give you any legal entitlement to have it zoned subsequently, or indeed to decide take over the elected member's job. The elected member's job here today is to decide what's in the best interest of proper planning and sustainable development of Gormanston. And nobody, be it developer or anybody else, can decide that for them just simply by pouring money into a proposal. So my answer to Councillor Tormey is no, you could not have a legal expectation just because you have done certain things that you're going to get or retain zoning. And I do not believe that the council will be open to a claim for compensation if they decide to accept the Chief Executive's recommendation on this matter. Thanks.
Thank you, Rory. Councillor Bonner. Councillor Bonner, just come back to you, Councillor Tormey then.
Yeah, thank you. Just in relation to, like, I've been contacted by these people. I don't know who they are, or I don't know anything about them. And when they were putting up the argument in relation to that they had already gone a long way with the Irish Water and the authorities towards the development of these lands, and there was a long established fact that that these lands are going to be developed. And I asked them for proof that they had paid the contributions, and that they had engaged with Irish Water, and that they were on the agenda that for the provision of this infrastructure. And they came back with correspondence to say that they had spent, I think, 850,000, something around that they were on the agenda, or that the infrastructure was well on its way for being delivered, and that and that's how I inform my thinking on this. So I just wanted to say that I had got correspondence from these people. So there's something here not just adding up. That they have said that they have engaged with Irish Water, that they have paid themselves together with some others have paid Irish Water the fees required to bring this infrastructure up the road, and it was well advanced. So I just wanted to say that when I had the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So
Councillor, give me mic.
Councillor Toole.
Good afternoon and Gorv Mahagot the Cahirlig. Thank you very much to the planners and to our senior water engineer, water services engineer for the background and all of the information. And suffice to say that should variations around the county come forward in the next couple of years in other areas where infrastructure is suboptimal, that the conversations and the opinions that we express today might be remembered in the future. Gorv Mahagot.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tolan.
Thanks, Carla, for letting me back in there, because I probably made my point quite thoroughly in relation to the train station. You know, I just want to make the point that every rail line goes through rural areas to get to large towns and cities. That does not mean that every piece of land adjacent to a rail line should be developed in a way that's being proposed in these notices of motions. That rail line is nowhere near the land there that's being proposed to be developed. You have to cross a very, very busy road. The train station is not fit for any more parking as it is. There's serious problems with parking for the people that are using it, and with the growth of Stamullen having the knock-on effect on the Gormanston train station. So just for this notice of motion and for the other notices of motions that mention Gormanston train station or rail line being a reason for developing an area, every single rail line in the country goes through rural areas. That does not mean that we should overdevelop or build high density homes adjacent to every section of rail line. It is important to recognise this as a rural area, a rural village, and not a large town. And I would appeal to my colleagues to respect the wishes of the residents of the village of Gormanston, and our colleagues here as well today. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Councillor. Rory, you have your hand up. Did you want to come back in there, or just didn't take the hand out?
I didn't take it down. My
Okay,
apologies.
that's okay, no problem. Councillor Tobin, and then we're going back to Councillor Tormey, and then we're going to a vote.
I don't know if I can query this or not, but I don't know if the council even has knowledge of it or not. But of those lands that the 4 pockets of lands that we're talking about, I know that there's large sums of money being thrown around the place, which it appears we're not thrown around the place if we dig into it. And we're told that this was done and that was done to bring fresh water and wastewater to the area, which don't seem to be true. And I'm just wondering, the landowners, were they the original landowners when the lands were zoned back when they were zoned, or were these lands that went into NAMA or were taken by banks and then sold at a cheaper price? Or
Councillor,
is that something we can inquire about?
Councillor, I'll stop you there.
Yeah.
I don't think that has any relevance to the discussion.
That's no problem.
Here now.
That's no problem. No.
No relevance whatsoever.
Yeah, no, it's just that the
Councillor
Tormey's point was that, and I'm not going to say anything. No. That large sums of money were spent, so therefore they deserve not to be dezoned, is what my point is.
Okay, but I think that has been clarified by Rory, that there's no legitimate expectation, or any legitimate expectation doesn't legally bind us to anything. I think we can go back to Rory again on that if necessary, but we're going to go to Councillor Smith now. Councillor Smith.
Hi, thanks, Cahirlig. Just to clarify, what I'm talking about isn't all the sites. It's this one directly related to 169, motion 169. So it's not to zone every piece of land in Gormanston. Thanks.
Cahirlig, you're on mute.
Sorry, Councillor Smith, if you just pop your hand down, thank you. And so we'll go back to Councillor Tormey. If we need further clarification, I don't think around this idea that there's the information is presented to support the motion is what we're considering. We have had a reply to the information that was presented to us. It's up to ourselves to make your own mind up on that now. So we go back to Councillor Tormey. just
Yeah,
to
here, look,
close
just
his
two
motion.
quick ones. I meant to ask the last time. Is
Yeah.
there not a CPO on lands in Delvin to provide for water services for Stamullen? And the second one is my understanding that the railway is only 350 metres from this proposed development. And I think access to that could be dealt with planning, whether it's a flyover or tunnels or whatever, but they would be all planning related issues. That's it, Chairman. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We get a reply to the CPO as is relevant to the water discussion, and then we'll move to we'll go back to Councillor Tormey, then we're going to a vote. Thank you.
Look, yeah, in terms of that CPO, I presume the mention is there is a CPO for a pipeline just across a water course for the Stamullen sewage scheme, which we're progressing. The pipeline goes to Balbriggan. It's a pumped main, and we've had to CPO some of the way leaves for that. So they relate to Stamullen, nothing to do with Gormanston.
Thank you. So thank you. So we go back to Councillor Tormey for the final word on this, and then we'll go to a vote.
No, Chairman, yeah, I'm happy with responses and just asking the members to support me in this. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, well, we're going to go to a vote now. Just to offer some clarity now as to what it is you're going to be asked to do. So in a moment, you're going to be asked, and we're taking notice of motion 169 and 170 together. So the Chief Executive's recommendation to both notice of motions is that no change recommended. If you're in agreement that no change recommended to both motion 169 and 170 is your preferred option, please indicate that by saying you agree. If you do not agree with the Chief Executive's recommendation and therefore agree with the intent of or agree with the contents of notice of motion 169 and 170, indicate that by saying you disagree. So if you agree with the Chief Executive's recommendation, you agree. If you don't, disagree. So everybody clear on that? Is there anybody not clear on what it is that you're going to be asked and the appropriate response to that question? And this is going to be a roll call vote. So with that, nobody has indicated that they have any questions. So we're going to move to Robert for a roll call vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Cahirlook, and I hope you can hear me. Okay. Councillor Adanuga is not present. Councillor Behan.
Disagree.
Councillor Bonner.
Disagree.
Councillor Bray.
Agree.
Councillor Cassidy.
Agree.
Councillor Dean is not present. Councillor Dempsey.
Agree.
Councillor Drew.
Disagree.
Councillor Fennessy.
Sorry, I lost my connection. I'm opposed to the motion. So what am I doing?
You're agreeing with the Chief Executive's recommendation.
I'm agreeing, is it?
Are you agreeing or disagreeing
I
on?
agree with the Chief Executive.
Okay, thank you. Councillor
I
Fitzgerald.
agree with the Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Councillor Fennessy. Councillor Fitzgerald is absent. Councillor Fitzsimons.
I agree.
Councillor Fox.
Yeah, I agree.
Councillor French.
Agree.
Councillor Gallagher.
Agree.
Councillor Garrity Smith. Sorry, Councillor, I can't.
Agree.
Thank you. Councillor Gilroy.
Agree.
Councillor Golden is not present. Councillor Harding.
Sorry, here goes a mute. Disagree.
Councillor Jamal.
Agree.
Councillor Keoghan.
Disagree.
Councillor Killian. Councillor Killian. I'm coming back to Councillor Killian. Councillor Laws is not present. Councillor McCabe.
Disagree.
Councillor McGinty.
Agree.
Councillor McKee.
Disagree.
Councillor Mead.
Disagree.
Councillor Moore. Councillor Moore is absent. Councillor Murphy.
Agree.
Councillor O'Connor.
Agree.
Councillor O'Neill is Is Councillor O'Neill present? I'm recording Councillor O'Neill as absent. Councillor O'Reilly.
Disagree.
Councillor Sarah Riley.
Agree.
Councillor Tommy Riley is absent. Councillor Smith.
Disagree.
Councillor Sewan.
Agree.
Councillor Tobin.
Agree.
Councillor Tobin. Councillor Tobin with us? I'm going to come back to Councillor Tobin. Councillor Tolan.
Agree.
Councillor Toole.
Agree.
And Councillor Tormey.
Disagree.
Thank you. And back to Councillor Killian. Is Councillor Killian still with us? I'm just checking my phone. Don't have any message. I'm recording Councillor Killian as absent. And Councillor Tobin. I'm recording Councillor Tobin as absent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. So the results are in agreement. Chief Executive's recommendation is 19. In disagreement is 11 and absent is 10. So both motions fall. Thank you. So we move on to notice of motion 171 now. Well, just to give it, Councillor O'Neill wasn't present at the time, so she. Okay, so it was at the time when we proposed putting it forward as part of a three motions. She wasn't present, but Councillor O'Neill, if she's present here now, we can. Is Councillor O'Neill present?
I spoke to Councillor O'Neill. She said she has withdrawn her motion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we move on to notice of motion 172. Councillor Alan Tobin. We get a seconder for that.
Second. Sharon Tolan here.
Councillor Tolan. Okay, Councillor Tobin.
Thanks very much. Kirlock. This motion, it had been already submitted in the original submissions that we had, and what I wanted to do was designate an area for car parking adjacent to the River Delvin going onto the beach there. Years and years ago, there used to be a parking area adjacent to the beach, but it was washed away over the years. As we know, there is a problem with erosion along the coastline of County Meath, and hopefully within the next few months we will be hopefully trying to address that in some way, shape or form. Some of you may have seen various video footage of Ben Head there, and it getting washed away and collapsing into the sea effectively. There are historical artifacts that have been destroyed over the years with the erosion along there, and thankfully of late, and hopefully it remains so, we've taken cars off the beach altogether. Gormanston Beach is an important area for wintering birds to come to migrate to this country, stay here for the winter, fatten themselves up basically for the journey for the summer to go back to where they will go to nest and things like that. So a car park now more than ever is important to take that traffic that goes to enjoy the beach there and the amenity that is, but it also means that you will not have hopefully cars coming onto that beach ever again, as I said before. The beauty about this particular area and the project on it, I spoke about the Gormanston Community Association before, and what they have done is they have actually put together an architectural drawing of the area, measured it out, and come up with the plan for this car park over the years. And I would love to have delivered it between 2014 and 2019 when I was first elected. However, we didn't, and The reason we didn't was partially because we don't have the area designated for any particular purpose. It is the only part of the old N1 where you can see the sea shore from the roadside. So it's actually it's an attractive little place that when people see the sea, they pull in, they have a look and whatever else. But also within that particular car park and amenity, you could have other little bits and pieces of amenities, charge points for your electric vehicle, a bottle bank, which is badly needed around the area there, and other facilities like for litter and stuff like that, that would be helpful for people using and utilizing the beach. So I don't know if you can scroll down there to where the map area is. I'm not sure if that's on the piece itself, but effectively I wanted to zone it for the purposes of tourism to try and get the car park in. It mightn't be the most appropriate type of zoning for it. I don't know if G1 open space or something like that would be, and I'd like to take the advice from the planners if they had some advice on it. I know the chief executive is saying no change, I think, on it, but I'd like to try and make this a reality, because we see the problems that we are having over in Bettystown at the moment, where you know, we've closed off the beach and we're using the school and things like that for the parking. But this here, it would be a very, very proactive step if we were to do it. And it's like everything else, outdoor ORIS funding or some life funding from the EU or something like that could be something we could avail of to make this a reality.
Thank you, Councillor. We go to the Chief Executives for a response.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Tobin. Yeah, this is an issue I think it came up before, and we looked at it, and I guess the request in itself, there was no change required or no change recommended in the Chief Executive's report. And that was based on the fact that issues like this are generally dealt with at the municipal district level, and where there's a need, money and the resources, generally these things get sorted at that level. Specifically, including zoning here could generate all sorts of activities. I would urge caution on using as a tourism zoning here because of the sensitive nature of the site where it is. Obviously Natura site adjacent. I'm not sure if part of the area highlighted in blue is in the Natura site or not. Either way, it most likely and most certainly would require a detailed environmental assessment. The reason I caution against the tourism zoning is that tourism zoning provides a broad range of commercial uses that could generate significant traffic and attraction of people. It is accepted that obviously the road is there and that people do come and will want to park their cars, but I think if we look at the thrust of what Councillor Tobin's arguing, it's around dealing with the existing situation and the car parking. So I would urge against a tourism zone, and if members, and I'm going to bring in probably Larry if he's available there, in terms of from an environmental perspective or an environment section point of view, there have been issues here in terms of dumping and that. So what sort of ancillary uses would come with a car park, and we need to be cognizant of that when we're looking at zoning. If it is a case that zoning were to be included here, I would guide members to a TU zoning or a transport and utility infrastructure zoning, which we've had at sporadic places around the county, and maybe I'd refer most recently to the discussion on the council yard at Laytown. But if we look at transport and utility infrastructure and what advice is provided in the zoning matrix, which guides us as the type of uses, and I quote from the plan, page 440, it states that these lands have been identified to provide for essential public infrastructure. The nature of these facilities is such that the use of lands is dedicated to the provision and maintenance of this structure. And it continues on. So if members were of a mind to zone it for anything, I think that would be the most appropriate one, because it has a limited number of uses and would suffice to provide for the immediate need for which Councillor Tobin is asking here. So I might just pass over to Larry Whelan if he's available there, just to outline the issues. Thank you.
Yes, Cathaoirleach, I think the area, well, it's known locally, Delvin Bridge or Irishtown, as I understand, is the town land. Now, there's no actual designated car park in that particular location. And in fact, there's quite irregular car parking arrangements in place. It's currently actually closed to car parking from the COVID restrictions. Barriers have been put in place. And I think, as the motion points out, there have been many environmental benefits of such closure. And now Pádraig mentioned just there in terms of any designations, it's not actually in the SP area, but it's certainly adjacent to one. So there would be required a certain level of appropriate assessment to be carried out. It is on quite a narrow road. Obviously, the land ownership issues would need to be clarified. Now, Pádraig has talked about maybe the appropriate zoning, the utility zoning or whatever, and not a tourism zoning. As Councillor Tobin has said, the idea maybe would be for car park, bottle banks and maybe associated facilities. We certainly would be positively disposed to, I suppose, anything that takes the pressure off our beaches and our dunes and all, and certainly that would be the case. And we found that during the lockdowns, huge amount of illegal dumping and stuff had taken place in that area. But I think, as Pádraig says, if the members are disposed to a zoning, certainly maybe the utility zoning, but it is something we can look at as part of our overall assessment of parking on our beaches. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Des. So I'm just going to go back to Councillor Tolan now and get his response to that suggestion around the amendment to transport and utility infrastructure zoning as opposed to tourism zoning. Is that something that'll frame the subject, that'll frame the remainder of our conversation on this potential?
100%. Absolutely agree with that. I wasn't getting the level of satisfaction that I was trying to get at MD level. So that would be absolutely appropriate, and I would be absolutely delighted with that, and I would love to have the support of my councillor colleagues.
So just before we actually make a vote, we will be looking at the proposed amendment to that before we vote. But bearing that in mind, it's now moved. The proposal is that we're moving away from the tourism designation and to the transport utility infrastructure zoning. So that, please keep that to that topic. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'm very happy to second that proposed amendment if so wished. And I think it is important because the opening the tourism zoning might have also included was for the landowner to possibly build some sort of structure which may not have been wished for. But I want to commend Councillor Alan Tobin for the foresight in seeing this. I would predict that Gormanston Beach and the tourism in that area is going to jump further in the coming years. We've seen by the figures in Termonfeckin that their figures of tourism have shot up ever since we took the cars off Beckenstown, Morrison Beach. But we done that without having good parking options in them areas. Now you can drive closer to beaches in Gormanston and Termonfeckin, and so these areas are going to attract more tourists, and that is likely to happen. So this is good foresight. We need to have, if we are serious about continuing with the cars off the beach, which obviously is a position I don't hold, but it's not the debate topic today. But if that is the position that the council is going in, they seriously have to push things like this. They have to push having parking right next to the beach. We had an earlier motion where we were arguing about how these houses weren't that close to a train station. Well, the parking that's up in Beckenstown is not close to the beach. It's further than that train station. That's not acceptable, because life today for so many people is about convenience. And if you have to push a buggy, carry a kid and buckets and spades to go to the beach a long distance, you're not going to do it. You're going to go to Termonfeckin or these places where it's easier. And we lost serious business. I'm friends with a few business owners in Termonfeckin and they've loved it. But that business that they've gained, we've lost. But it's right to see this motion. This is a well thought out proposal for Councillor Tobin. The right zoning is crucial so that we get what he wants. And I'm happy to second that proposal amendment if he wishes, and fully support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tolan.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. I'm 48 years old and I've pushed many a buggy for many a kilometre with buckets and spades and all sorts of paraphernalia when abroad to visit a beach with my children. It's not the end of the world. There's no doubt about it. The success of having cars off the beach has been fabulous. the attraction for local people to use the beaches, for visitors when they can come outside their 5 kilometres, and for the businesses themselves. I've had reports of businesses being increased by 40% over the period of last summer, because the footfall past the businesses from the parking areas. So I'm fully supportive of this motion. Look, there's no doubt about it, with the increase in the use of the beaches and the increase in swimmers, open water swimmers has become very, very popular over the last year. And Gormanston has, like Bettystown, Laytown and Mornington, it has seen a new lease of life, and locals and visitors have seen it for all its glory. With the increase in birds visiting as well, it's just been fantastic. And of course, we've managed to not have to call out our litter warden to remove mattresses and all sorts from the beach. Gormanston would have been particularly struggled over the years, because it is so isolated and quiet. And in the dead of night, you'd have your litter louts going down there in vans and dumping all sorts of stuff. That just can't happen anymore. So look, we have got to look at providing the facility. I would have thought perhaps that F1 was probably a more appropriate zoning. It's certainly what I suggested to Councillor Tobin. It provides for car parks as well, and would also provide for other possible amenities, rather than restricted to the TU zoning, which is very transport orientated. That particular site, again, is not adjacent to the train station. The train station is up on the other road. So I would take Padraig's advice on this, but either way, I think today we need to zone this piece of land in order to ensure that we can provide a proper amenity for locals and for visitors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Amanda Smith.
Thanks, Caherlick. Yes, I would support the motion also. I'd just be a bit concerned that it's not very big, but still it's a really good motion, and I'd like to see it zoned. I was going to suggest it to be zoned similar to across the river. Here at the other side is in Fingal, and that's zoned HA, which I think is high amenity. But if Alan's happy to accept that zone, and I support that also. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tobin. We're going to go back to you now, and then we're going to go to a vote.
Thanks very much. No, look, I think we should go with what the planners are telling us as well, because because it's transport, and people will know there's a bus stop there adjacent to it, and there's a nursing home adjacent to it, that improvements need to happen there on the old N1 as well, with crossing facilities and stuff like that. So I think it's appropriate. Let's see how we get on with it. We'll have 5 or 6 years to make sure that something happens on it. And if obstacles come in our way, they come on our way. But at the moment, we have no zoning on it. Now we will have an appropriate type of zoning on it, and let's see how it goes. I know that I can share afterwards with councillors from Ashburn MD the plan that was made for it, and the amount of parking spaces and stuff like that. You'll see the size of it. It's
wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you very much, Councillor. So before we go to the vote, we just dropped the actual text of the amended objective.
Could I just get an answer to my question, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, of course. Yeah, so we get that in the summation as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I think that might be over to us. I might just confirm, we've got the map up there, and just with Councillor Tobin, that it's this area between the access road into the site and the Delvin River, with which the blue line or the proposed zoning is on. We might just confirm that, just to be sure we all understand which it is. Because yeah, okay, it's a narrow strip, but let's see. Obviously, it'll be environmentally assessed as part of the material amendment. So we'll take it from there. In relation, just the direct question from Councillor Tolan, can I just check what that is, and I'll respond accordingly.
Yeah, just would F1 not be more appropriate for that? You know, we could provide a car park under F1, but also a cycleway or a trail development along that area, or a small bit of recreation facility. Rather than the TU is very restrictive in relation to transport, considered it's not near the train station either.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Tolan. I think everything you've said will be permissible under the transport utilities. The F1 open space is what it is. If you look at, like, you're talking about craft shops, you're looking at craft centre, there are more, I guess, ancillary developments that could be proposed under F1 than there is even on T1, but T1 will permit the park and the cycleways, the footpaths, and I think it's essentially infrastructure, supporting infrastructure to assist users of the beach that this is for. I don't think transport, that zoning restricts that in any way. So in our opinion, it's the appropriate zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. We might just pull up the proposed amendment and confirm that is the amendment proposed by Councillor Tobin. He's happy with it, if that's possible. So,
Look, if I could come in on this,
yeah,
we don't actually have the proposed amendment drawn up, but it would be to zone an area from the R132 to the Dublin-Belfast Railway Bridge adjacent to the Delvin River TU to provide for appropriate and sustainable visitor and tourist facilities and associated uses.
Okay, you happy with that, Councillor Tobin?
I am indeed. I just are we agreeing or disagreeing?
Yeah, well, that'll come to itself now in a second. We just
no, that's grand.
Yeah,
just so I know. Thanks. I'm very happy.
Okay, thank you very much. So the amendment is still, so the Chief Executive's recommendation is no change recommended. So the amendment to your motion, or the amendment that is that correct? So we have an amended. That's what I'm just going to. Is that the recommendation is now amended? Is that correct?
The recommendation is amended to accept it based on the fact that the zoning will be TU instead of D1. Thank you.
That's fine. So now we have an agreed, or we have a recommendation of a change. So what we do is we can ask members, do they agree with that, simply by a show of hands, and we'll move to that page now. The voting page, please. And again, just to for clarification, that members understand what it is they're voting on, and is that the Chief Executive's recommendation, as outlined to us, with that change to T1, which is transport utility. And so if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Okay, thank you. And if you lower your hands, members, please. Councillor Keoghan, thank you. Councillor Garrett, exit. And if you are not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Okay, that's 21 in agreement, nobody in disagreement. The motion carries. So we move on now to notice of motion 175, Councillor Conor Tormey. If you're seconder for that motion, please.
Chairman, I'll save you the bother there. I'm going to withdraw that because I didn't get the last one in. I'm not going to get this one passed.
Okay, very insightful of you, Councillor. Thank you very much. So that's formally withdrawn. Excellent, thank you. So now we move to notice of motions from the floor. So we have notice of motion number 1 in the name of Councillor Amanda Smith. If you have a seconder for that, please. We have a seconder for the notice of motion, please.
I second it, Chair.
Councillor Thomas Behan. Okay, Councillor Smith, over to you.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I didn't know which one was coming up first.
Yeah, notice of motion 1. Yeah.
Thanks, Carla. I suppose the reason I put this motion forward is at Gormanston camp we have over 250 acres. It's state owned. Some of it is used obviously for the army land training. The air is gone now. but there's a lot of land around the camp that is used for agricultural use. I think there's 1 year leaseholds on it. I mean, I know if you look at Gormanston settlement map, there's a huge amount of community land zoned on the map, that orange, colour orange there. But this is not community land. This is a private business who has locked out the community in Gormanston. There is no community use on it at all. There's a football club who used the playing field, or did use the playing field, were evicted last year. Out of desperation, they asked the Franciscans management company, could they play out in the back fields of the college, which is an old pitch and putt golf course. Reluctantly, the management agreed, but he charged them 28,000 for 1 year's lease, which they paid. And they were to develop the field at their own cost, which they did. They're now in a situation where the next lease is up. They haven't had to play, obviously, due to COVID, but if they don't take this new lease and pay another 28,000, they have nowhere else to go. By the end of next year, their savings will be depleted and there will be nowhere for them to go. And I think if we have state lands in Gormanston, you know, I think we should try to identify some of those lands where the community of would benefit from that. And I would ask people to support this if they could. Thank you, Caherlick.
Thank you, Councillor. So we just go for a response, a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Smith. Yes, the site refers to the Gormanston camp, which, as we understand it, is within the MOD. So it is essentially state-owned lands. The lands were zoned white land, just as is shown on the map in the previous plan. As part of the discussions on the issues paper and the draft development plan, I understand that colleagues of mine and in this position previously met with relevant officials to discuss the white land and the need for zoning or otherwise. And it was agreed for the draft plan that the lands would not have a white land, that there would be left just as the camp and zoned rural as the rest of the surrounding land. Since then, I met with some department officials and commercial people who have an interest. I'm not at liberty to disclose any details, but there are proposals for development at this camp. It was one meeting, nothing further happened. That was probably about a year ago. But there are proposals to develop potentially commercial facility here, but that's all we can see at the moment. We're not quite clear. The map shows a whiteland zoning, and it refers to part to be identified for open space. I'm not sure which part is open space, but the comments I'd make on it is that there are other lands closer to the village itself that would be more suitable for open space if we were to designate open space. And the reason being is that people coming from Gormanston village would have to cross a very busy regional road, the R132, and then onto a local road, many of which are likely to be car-based movements as opposed to people walking to a facility. So that it is for that reason that we wouldn't consider to replicate the zoning, so neither the whiteland or open space zoning to be included here. And that was a decision that was made on the draft development plan. And I'd also hope that the zoning would remain rural because we wouldn't want to prejudice any potential commercial ventures that may happen at this location in the future. And open space zoning could be detrimental to that. So it is the advice of the executive to leave the land zoned rural and not identify any particular uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. We go back to Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Pádraig. If there is potential plans for something coming down the line, can an objective be put on the land that community would gain from that? That there would be a community, like when I say, I don't mean community zoning, what I mean is F1 open space, the HA, which is, I think it's, I'm not sure what HA is, but that it's F1 open, that we wouldn't be looking for developments to be built, but that there would be some sort of an objective that, you know, there would be open space provided, because this site and the camp, you know, it is ideally located. It's at the back of the old COP pub. It's where the football club originally came from before they went to Gormanston. But as well as that, it has 2 roads of access down Cockhill and over at Irishtown, where there's loads of opportunities where you could have entrances to some sort of F1 open space, and it comes out on the beach as well, which would be brilliant if we ever got the beach designated and part of the management plan. That, you know, there could be somewhere here where a hub of tourism onto the beach. So I wonder, can an objective be added to that where there would be a gain for the community? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tobin, just to allow Padraig to have some time to consider that, we'll go to Councillor Tobin.
Thanks, Gerlach. And this is just over on the Bettystown Laytown side of the municipal district. I would be opposed to any development really on those Defence Forces lands. I think that in this country over the last number of years we've been downgrading our Defence Forces, and in particular our Air Corps, which I think we shouldn't be doing. We have a proud aviation history in our country, and we since the dawn of aviation, and I think that we should be doing everything in our power to make sure that Gormanston camp remains an active area for the Defence Forces. And then don't forget, into the future, and on Defence Forces lands, we could have the likes of private jets coming in and stuff like that, and it could be a hub in some way, shape or form in the future for aviation again. It is an active firing range. You'll often see the Air Corps out there doing their bits and pieces in it. So I wouldn't be into changing it to G1 or F1 and people having the presumption that they're going to be able to use it for football fields or whatever else. In this country, and in particular with Brexit, we're going to have to be protecting our fisheries. We're going to have to ensure that we have, you know, that we're able to keep an eye on what's coming across the water with customs and stuff like that, search and rescue, and all of those sorts of things. So I think that we really, really do need to ensure that the camp remains viable as what it was designed for, which is an Air Corps training area. I would suggest maybe to Councillor Smith that nomination number 3 would be ideal, that instead of going for residential there, maybe put the F1 or G1 within that notice of motion, that it might be more appropriate. And then to think into the future again as well, to get rid of something or to zone something that already is an active airfield. If we look at drones and transport of drones and things like that, this could become a very, very important hub for something like that in the future. So it would be very, I think, premature of us to do something with the camp when it has so much potential with aviation and flight and the purpose that it was there for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. We might just go back to Padraig for his response to Councillor Smith's question. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Tobin. Actually, a number of the points he makes are very valid. I think this is to be seen as an asset, and certainly when I said commercial, I meant commercial in a sense. Aviation is certainly a big part of it. that potential development. And I think it is very difficult to get areas where aviation, if you were to look at a map of Meath, you probably have to head to North Meath to get large swathes of open land that potentially you could look at any type of aviation. The reality is, I think we need to protect such areas, but it's suffice to say, I think it will remain strong, and there is active a firing range there as well, which is correct. So my former comments are that we should just leave it as a rural zone, and then let's see how this project develops. In answer directly to Councillor Smith's question, I don't think that these lands are appropriate for open space. If you consider, and I think you've made a lot of valid arguments regarding community groups and clubs, there are other lands very much closer to the village that could be made available. And I think Councillor Tobin has referred to one pocket of land that there's a notice of motion on. There are numerous lands that has notices of motion that are very appropriate for green space, and you are entitled here to make any representations in terms of making some of that open space. That'd be my suggestion as well. So it would be best. And I guess in terms of safety, to finish on Gormanston Camp, the public and the public safety and the protection of the assets there, it's most likely that they have to be protected. And in terms of the potential uses or the commercial use which I'm referring to, it's most likely, members of the public freely accessing in and out of it would not be considered appropriate. So it would be of a sensitive nature. So I'd finish on that and say that if the members are of a view that we have notices of motion from the floor, we have active areas under consideration, there are other areas closer to the village where we could look at active green space, open space, or whatever's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. Councillor Tolan.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. And just to follow on, I suppose, I mean, there's nothing I'd love more than to support the football club in identifying a proper site and a forever home, but to identify that site in what I would suggest is perhaps an ad hoc manner, that, this is a site that's large enough, and therefore, let's try and identify that. I mean, it is, as you said, a really, really important asset, not just to the county, but to the country. All of any of the air accidents that happen, sadly happen in the country, are investigated at Gormanston. I believe if it was removed as an air strip, that the only other one is Baldonnel. So to have that as a second one here in the country is quite a valuable asset, and I think it would be a big mistake to jeopardise that in any way, shape or form. I would also ask maybe Rory for advice on the legality of changing the zoning of a piece of land that's owned by the Department of Defence, and whether or not that's within our remit to do. But yeah, I can't support this motion, so I'll be supporting the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We might just go to Rory on that specific question. It's one that might frame our thinking very specifically.
Yeah, Cathaoirleach, it's one that very rarely arises, but I believe it is within our remit to apply a land use objective to state lands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Behan.
Against their wishes.
Again, Cathaoirleach and Councillor, the statutory responsibility for deciding what's in the best interest of proper planning and sustainable development of our county rests with you, the members, subject to the statutory constraints we've all been talking about for the last number of weeks about policy, etc. And I'm not aware of any government policy that immunises the state lands from having a land use objective applied to them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I suppose with regards no more than any other no more than any other land zoning consideration, unless there's a formal submission for or against the zoning. We are unsure of the status of landowners' feelings towards the zoning, and that has been something we haven't considered that much over the course of our discussions prior to this. So that's just to consider as well. So, Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Cahirlock. I did second the motion, and I did that to allow the motion to go through. It didn't look like anyone else was seconding it, and I just wanted to give Councillor Smith a fair crack at having her motion heard by the floor. But saying that, I would have to agree with the executive. You know, I do believe that it should be retained as is, and as Padraig has outlined, that there is plans in motion for that, and that they are exploring different options that would be more suitable, and that maybe if different lands could be highlighted to achieve the community focus that you're looking for, you might explore that. But I will be agreeing with the Chief Executive on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go back to Councillor Smith.
I mean, I'm not trying to take from the great, you know, the army. I know more than anybody how important that base is. My father was stationed there all his life. My brother is in the army. I know the importance of Gormanston camp and to the county. It's fantastic. You know, I'm proud to be, you know, my family were in the army, but this is massive, 250 acres of land around the camp that's not used. It's used by farmers. It's not being used by the army. There is a certain amount of it that is, and yes, I wouldn't hinder or try to take from that, absolutely not. But also just to say that the air base is no longer in Gormanston, that the Air Corps left Gormanston years ago. It's a ground training army. It's the Air Corps aren't there anymore. But if there's plans for something to come, I don't know what it is. I'm wondering, is it the port or what is it? I don't know. All I'm asking for is that some of the land have an objective where it's well away from all that stuff, where there would be community gain from it. That's all I'm asking. And I would ask the members to please support it, even if it was an objective that could be put in. I don't want to pick the land. That's why I worded the motion that the Chief Executive might identify the lands. But look, if I can ask for it to go to a vote. Thank you, Hurley.
Okay, thank you. So we just go to a vote now, and so the question put to you will be with the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change. If you're in agreement with that, indicate that. It's going to be a raised hands. Yeah. So if you're agreeing with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Thank you, members. If you could lower your hands, please. And if you're not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Keoghan, sorry, three, Councillor Keoghan, yeah. So, anybody else wish to, I wouldn't like to cut anybody off there. Okay, so it's Councillor Toole.
Thank you, Cahir. Look, I'm very sorry. I had to step out for a second. If it's too late, that's fine. Count me as an abstention, but I would
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So that's grand. So the results are so 19 in agreement, 3 in disagreement, and 1 abstention, as indicated by Councillor Gillian Toole. So now we move on to the motion falls. So now we move on to notice of motion 2. Again, Councillor Amanda Smith. If we could have a second for that motion, please. We seconder, Councillor Tobin. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Well, this motion it's about Gormanston Castle. I mean, the castle is of historical interest to the state. It's, you know, you have the Preston family and the Gormanston papers. It's a protected castle. The whole of this is the Franciscans camp. This is the Gormanston campus here, and I'm asking that the zoning, the community zoning at the back of the castle, which is actually the front of the castle, it has a driveway from the back. There's protected trees and greenery. But if you look to the right-hand side of where I have this arrow, where that's Fingal, and that's also part of the Gormanston College. So when you come out the main front door of the castle, to your right you're in Fingal, and to your left is this piece that I'm asking to be zoned F1 or high amenity. On the Fingal side, which is part of the whole estate as such, is designated GB. So to future protect the castle from any further development, that community zoning would be zoned back to F1 open space. Would this be a possibility? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. If we just get the response from the Chief Executive.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the proposal is to change the current zoning. I'm not sure, I might just check with Councillor Smith if it is the entirety of that area outlined in blue, or essentially that section of the overall estate, which is to be zoned F1. I suppose the justification is that from a planning point of view, and has historically been the case, that entire, if we call it the estate, was zoned of the Franciscan College was zoned G1, which allows pretty much for all community and education uses. We considered it appropriate, and again it provides sort of appropriate protection for the existing facilities. An F1 zoning would, to some extent, obviously limit the type of development that could or could not happen. I'm not sure if there are any plans for any development in that area, but I guess together with, regardless of what zoning or objective we put on it, it has to be with the agreement of the landowners to get these pathways put in place and allow the public to get in there. So we consider the zoning to be sufficient for what it is, just so that we know the zoning on the opposite side in the Fingal area would appear to be green belt. That's what the GB stands for, and naturally that would be just to protect their land. It's green belt or a rural zoning. So for ours, and historically we've always kept it G1, and that's what we would like to see continuing. So it would be G1 in its entirety. Thank you.
Again, just to go back to Councillor Smith before we let anybody else in, there was a question with regards to the boundary. Is that boundary indicating all of that land, or just the piece with the blue line around it?
Yeah, thanks, Carla. That blue piece I have marked is actually the protected trees and the driveway into the front of the castle. And the lands that are zoned by Fingal are actually at the front of the castle also. But yes, it's all that blue. It's all that blue.
But it's out. Sorry, Councillor. It's out to the boundary though. It's not just the part the marked by the mark. Like, it's out to the boundary as marked on the map in black. We'll say.
This is the boundary. The blue is the boundary on the County Meath side. Yes.
Okay. Does that clarify your question, Padraig?
Yeah.
Yes. So essentially, and just to clarify, it would then mean that if the motion passed, it would be the entire area around there, right out to the boundaries, which will be zoned F1. So everything abutting, adjoining those blue lines, and I would say on the basis of the map to the west of it will be zoned F1.
Is that accurate, Councillor Smith?
Yes, it's yes, I think so.
Okay.
It's all the land. if you can imagine the castle, and then it's all the land right and left hand side of it, but this one is to the left hand side of it along the coast.
Okay,
And it's all that
we
blue
agree,
bit.
but just again, is everybody clear what we're going to be discussing now? Because it's just because this is the discussion.
Yes, well, it is.
No, not yourself, Councillor. You're quite clear.
Okay.
What I'm asking you is,
okay,
as per that map, there is a parcel of land that's not within the boundary, that is not marked within the blue square or whatever lines those are. The question Porrick asked you, just for clarity, and marked on a map, because this is that it goes out to the boundary of that land, not just to where the blue line is. Is that blue line indicative rather than?
Oh, that blue line is actually an arrow pointing to the red.
Yeah, no, but there's a square there, Councillor. Look at this. Look at the map. There's a quite clearly enclosed space there.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah. Now, outside that enclosed space, there's a black line. That's the boundary of the land. Are you talking about right out to that boundary there? There.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's clarified. Everybody clear on the piece of land we're talking about now? Padraig Fitzsimons is not clear. Councillor Fitzsimons is not clear. Indicated. Have you looked in there, Padraig? Councillor?
Thanks, Cahirlock. I went to school in Gormanston many years ago, to say, and my father was in the Air Corps in Gormanston as well, just per chance. So I know the area fairly well. I've no idea what's going on here, I have to say. I'm really flummoxed. I know the castle, the college, the training grounds, the pitches, all around the area, the shops where where the shops used to be, etc. But I just don't get this. I don't understand it. So could we get more explanation, please? Thanks.
So I think just if I'm correct in my assertion that blue triangular shaped line, the enclosed area includes all of the land to the left of the vertical line.
Yeah.
That's really included in the boundary. Is that essentially, is that correct? To the left, as we're looking at it. Yeah.
Yes, but just to let Councillor Fitzsimons know, he knows the area. This is the driveway at the back of the college where you have all the protected trees, and on the left is the golf course. It's already green open space. But this potential zoning of G1, which has been on it for years, could result in developments being built on top of that golf course or whatever. And to let you know about the rest.
But no, just but as everybody clear. I know I'm
over there, and I'd like to explain to
I'm not at this moment in time we're only talking about the piece of land. Whether Councillor Fitzsimons knows it or not, the rest of us do not know it. So what we're just trying to make sure that everybody is clear on the piece of land we're talking about. You cleared that up. It's to the left of that vertical line. All of that land up to the land boundary that's coloured orange on my screen. That's
it's
the
all
parcel.
the land. Yeah.
Is anyone else here unsure as to the parcel of land we're talking about? That's my question. Okay, thank you. Now, so we're going to open it up to discussion based on so that the notice of motion is that we change the zoning from G1 to F1 on that parcel of land. That's without the context of it. That's what it requires, that we change the designation of the zoning from G1 to F1 on that piece of land, and that's where we're taking it from now. Am I correct on that, Councillor Smith?
Yes.
Okay.
And could I ask Porrick if to keep it, if the recommendation is to keep its own G1, would the G1 zoning protect what's there already, the protected trees and the driveway? Would it protect that?
Okay, thank you. So now we're going
from development.
Okay, thank you. So we go back to Padraig for that particular question, and then we're going to open the floor, starting with Councillor Tobin.
Sorry, Cahirlock, it's Alan here.
Okay.
I'll just respond to Councillor Smith's question in relation to the protection of the setting and the trees. The overall use of the castle domain and grounds is as a school and playing pitches, and it's considered that this accords with the G1 zoning. The castle itself is a protected structure, and that designation provides for protection to the castle and all features, structures within the curtilage. So this would include the walls and also the setting, which would include the grounds and the mature tree planting. So any planning application which would be submitted within the G1 zoning would be assessed in detail regarding the impact upon the protected structure and also on the setting, and that would include the mature trees and the grounds and the landscaping as well. So it would be assessed as part of any planning application, the impact on the setting and the protected structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Tobin.
Thanks a million. I suppose to envisage what's going on here, I'd love to see this kind of being like an Ardgillan Castle or a Castletown House eventually. I don't know if any of you have been over to Gormanston Castle. It's a beautiful area, but not only the trees, but the gardens themselves are something that should be protected as well. And there is or was a golf course, I think a 9-hole in around the area as well, obviously used by the students when it was a boarding school. I just wonder, under its current zoning, is it still protected? I mean, it will, if a planning permission came in on it, it would be on the merits of that. And I presume if there's a protected structure, do we have, like in other countries, protections on trees and ages and, you know, the width of the tree and whatever else, or the type of tree or whatever it is? The other thing that I have a concern about just as well with the boundary, I know Amanda, Councillor Smith's unclear about where the boundary starts and ends, but I think that the boundary within that blue box or triangle or whatever it is, it needs to be to the north of the Cromwell's Avenue. It needs to be in line with that, because with historical reference and everything else, that was the original avenue up into the castle itself. So to protect it in line with Cromwell's Avenue would make sense. It doesn't make sense not to protect it in line with that, and you can see that within the grounds of the place itself. The other thing as well is, I mean, I know for a fact that the residents have a fear of what could happen within that area there. I would call what happened with the swimming pool as reckless vandalism. Basically, there was a fantastic swimming pool there. I'm sure Councillor Fitzsimons did the backstroke many a time in that particular swimming pool, and that swimming pool was being done up so that the public could use it, and they damaged the roof, and they decided it wasn't feasible to do it anymore, and a perfectly good swimming pool was absolutely destroyed. And I know that people in the area have a fear that anything could happen if that was allowed to happen. And I suppose the question for Pádraig is, what is the best way to protect it, or is it protected as is? Thanks.
Splendid. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cahira. I have quite an interest in this site. I suppose I did have family who attended there, but it was more from a historical context. The castle stands on the site of a pre-existing castle, which was built in the 14th century, and then this one was built in the 1700s. And it was from that I have quite an interest in it. But as Alan Russell did point out, and my main point was going to be, it is not just the present structure that is protected, but it is the setting, which includes the trees and the things around it. So I would be of the understanding that it's fairly safe as it is. And, you know, any planning application, I know we're in a shortage of school spaces, but hypothetically, if someone tried to build a school at the front of it, they would be very restricted by planning, so much so that it would be very unlikely to happen. It is a great castle. There probably is tourism potential. There probably should be more done with it. There's a local folklore story about the castle and the Prestons that used to live there, and how the foxes of County Meath used to gather.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think we need to go back that far. Okay,
yes.
let's just keep it. It's outside the scope of the county development plan. We only need 2021 onwards. Thank you.
But I suppose the reason for saying that is that these folklores and stories can often add into tourism, and so there is serious potential there. But there is no potential there if the landowners are not interested. And unless the landowners have some level of interest. In 1946, the Franciscan order took it over, but unless they're going to push this or they want that, I don't see any real benefit, because it won't happen. But there is serious potential there, and in some ways it probably should be more opened up to the community and things like that. But I do believe what Alan Russell did say, that the protection that's on it is probably good enough, and I don't know if changing the zoning will make any real difference. But still, I commend Councillor Amanda Smith for bringing this motion, for hoping to build stronger protection onto it. Thank you.
I might just go to Padraig first, because there has been two questions and maybe we might be able to answer those questions. Will a G1 or an F1 designation on these lands change or make the lands any more safe, any more prone to development? What is the, we say, with regards to the security of these lands in their current status? Is there a variation or a change of one designation to the other that makes it more prone or likely for the protected structures as laid out to be any more or less affected by development? I think that's the crux of the question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to bring in my trusty lieutenant here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Just Alan here back again. As I stated a few moments ago, the protected structure designation applies to the castle and its curtilage. So the curtilage would include the grounds, the driveway, the mature trees, as well as views to and from the castle. It is a protected structure. Regardless of the zoning, any development within those grounds would be assessed in detail as part of any planning application. So the G1 zoning, under the G1 zoning, any planning application that comes in there would be assessed in detail. An F1 zoning would not in particular apply any greater protection to it. There is still a number of uses permitted under an F1 zoning, so it's the Chief Executive's consideration that the G1 zoning is appropriate and that there is adequate protection there in the protected structure designation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Tolan.
I was about to lower my hand because I'm losing the will here. I think that answers everything, really. It's already protected, and rightly so. It's a fabulous castle. I'm very, very familiar with it, having grown up down the road. My kids learned to swim in that swimming pool that Alan Tobin has spoken about. I would have to say it was a health and safety issue when they were learning to swim. Even the showers were a health and safety issue. But look, I mean, we're constantly promoting economic development in this county, and the fact of the matter is the Franciscan order sold it to a commercial development that has the possibility of creating jobs. But once the grounds and the castle is protected, I think that's all we should be worried about. Whether they want a 9-hole golf course or a 9-hole pitch and putt shouldn't really be relevant. I think our planners have the wherewithal to look at the settings and the trees and what a developer will propose for a site and adjudicate accordingly. And we will all have opportunities to make submissions should an application come in. But I mean, there isn't a whole lot of difference between F1 and G1, so I really don't see the point in this. I won't be supporting it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, we have covered this topic from 1649 to date, so we're going to bring in Councillor French on the topic now, but there's no need to go back beyond 1649 and the arrival of Cromwell in Ireland. So
that was 1649. The title Gormanston is the oldest title in Ireland, but that's not the point.
Is it relevant?
It's not relevant to this. What is relevant to this is a number of councillors have mentioned trees. And we've been reassured by the planning department that these trees are protected. But I just want to clarify, because my experience is, yes, they're protected with regard to planning, but they can still be felled if the people get a forestry license to do so, or if they're a danger to people. So the protection of existing trees, we may put them into our planning, and yes, if somebody applies for planning, we can make it a condition of planning that those trees be preserved. But these trees can be removed, even though we think they're protected. They can be removed if they're dangerous, or if they get an order from the wildlife or forestry department. So they're not as protected as you might think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor French. Councillor Fitzsimons, then we're going back to Councillor Smith, and then we're going to go to a vote.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Quite an interesting debate, really. In a sense, the more than Councillor Tolan has pointed out, I don't see what benefit it's going to be, whether it's one or the other. But I just also want to point out that there's a cemetery here, never mind trees, beside the college, which hasn't been mentioned at all, and how that comes into play, I'm not sure at all. But just a point of interest, just to put that in there. Thank you. Priest Barry there.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons. Councillor Harding.
Yeah, I'd be very brief. Go here, look, and thanks for letting me in. I agree with the management's role in this, and just in relation to the history lesson that you're getting. My father would have been an FCA member. I'm very familiar with that whole area. He in fact took the internees from the north into the camp in 1971. So seeing as people are chipping in with their history lessons, I said I would as well. But in relation to this particular issue, I'm agreeing with management. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Behan, any family anecdotes you'd like to share with us before we move on?
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you, Ciarán. Look, I know the area very well. I spent a lot of time training up there growing up, and I have to say, I found it very, very difficult to keep up with that motion. You know, it confused me more than anything when we were discussing the land. But I really believe that the chief executive's response is good enough. Everything is protected as is. Of course, we can fell trees if they're a danger. We can do that with any protected trees if they are causing a danger, but they're sufficiently protected. So I will be agreeing with the chief executive on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It seems that the more familiar you are with the place, the more confusing the motion is. So what we'll do is we'll move on back to Councillor Smith, just to get her to finally speak on the motion. Then we'll go to a vote, and then we'll go to the next notice of motion. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Ciarán. No, I'm happy enough with the chief executive response that the area would be protected if there was any development about to happen. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. So now we move on, we vote. If we're going to ask the question, are you in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation to notice a motion 2, which is no change recommended? If you're in agreement, please indicate that now. Thank you very much. If you lower your hands, please, members. Councillor Gallagher, you might just pop your hand down. Councillor Gallagher. Thank you. So if you are not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Thank you very much. So it's 20. Oh, Councillor Killian.
I'm very sorry. Sorry, Ciarán. Look, I'm only after coming back in. I've had difficulty, and I'm not sure exactly at this stage what I heard some of what you did. I lost it.
That's okay. So what you're doing now is did you see the last vote?
No.
So there was to raise your hand. We'll say you're not voting in this. It's a considerable vote one way or another in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation. So if you'd like to just abstain from this vote, just for clarity.
All right. Okay.
So if you could just lower your hand, thank you. Oh, and just for clarity, Councillor Smith did accept the Chief Executive's recommendation as well. So there's no confliction here either. Okay, so just for your own clarity. Just can't hear you, Councillor. Okay, so move on to notice of motion 3 from the floor. Councillor Amanda Smith, we have a seconder for that motion, please. You have a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor Nick Killian. Councillor Smith, over to you.
Thanks, Ciarán. With your permission, could I put an amendment to this motion from A to... Sorry, go ahead.
If you could just turn off your camera, maybe, because you're breaking up, just to ensure everybody can hear exactly what it is you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so if you can you hear us now?
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Okay, fire ahead.
With your permission, yeah, great. With your permission, Caherlick, could I put an amendment forward on this motion to zone it G1 as opposed to A2, if possible?
Yeah, it's not a.
We have a big need of G1 lands in Gormanston. So if I could make the amendment for that to be zoned G1.
Okay, we get a response from the executive on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Smith. I suppose what we would state, G1, we obviously, as you can see from the map on the screen, have quite a significant amount of G1 lands in Gormanston and the area. I'm going to call it north. I don't think it is, but on the top of your screen is all G1, which is Greenfield, and there were proposals potentially for an education campus or school there. It hasn't advanced any further. Looking specifically at this site, it is an elongated strip of land that is slightly detached from the village boundary itself. And in the interests of consistency, then I have to state that the nursing home, which is located to the southeast, I would call it, I'm just looking, yeah, it's Trinity Care. Gormanston Wood Nursing Home is located in the corner. That there was a submission on that, which was submission 587, that requested an additional 6.3 acres just to the west of the nursing home. And at the time, we resisted that. The reason I mention it in terms of this proposal and in relation to some of the discussion that has been had here this afternoon is looking at potentially open space. And is there potential, I would add, on that circa 6 acres beside the nursing home for open space for one of the clubs, because it's adjacent to a G1 zoning. The proposal, we resisted that, but in light of the conversation today, I'm just going to throw it out to the members that it's something that could be considered, because there is a submission on it, and I again refer to submission 587. Regarding the piece of land which has been referred to here, I'm not quite sure what the proposals would be and what the potential is for an elongated strip such as that for development. So if we were going to add G1 zoning, our suggestion would be, from a purely a planning perspective, is that it would go adjacent to the existing G1 zoning as highlighted, identified beside the nursing home. We're not quite sure what the development potential would be here. It is slightly detached from the existing footprint. There is a ribbon of development along the local road to the west of it. So our suggestion is that there are other sites and a submission there to be considered that I would ask the members to discuss and maybe consider instead of this elongated strip. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so just to clarify this for members, so in regards to the piece of land that's relevant to the notice of motion, your recommendation would be no change recommended. And then when we get to discussing the submissions, and particularly submission 587, which is currently no change recommended, there's a potential change recommended to that notice of motion. Or submission. When we get to the submissions, subject to what the discussion that takes place now. Is that right? Am I right in saying that?
That's absolutely correct. And I suppose what I'm doing is informing the members of that coming down the line. So we're trying to be helpful here, so that we don't want to be saying no to a notice of motion and then suddenly something could be considered, because the submission on the nursing home and the lands adjacent was all within the one boundary. So that's why we could consider it. Thank you.
Okay. So we go back to Councillor Smith in light of that information that arose from the discussion around her notice of motion. What are her feelings on that?
Sorry, I just don't understand. So
Okay.
Yeah, if you could just explain, is there new community zone and at nursing home?
Okay, so and that was my understanding, and then I'm subject to being corrected, which has been every moment of every day of my life to date. So your notice of motion is requesting that identified parcel of land, 2.42 hectares, be changed from its current status to G1. Okay. Now, the recommendation from the Chief Executive is that no change is recommended to your notice of motion. Okay, now we just put that to one side for a moment. Now, depending on the outcome of that discussion, I presume, there is a proposed amendment to a submission 587, which relates to that piece of ground that the little arrow is over. Am I right? Could you just indicate that piece of land, please? Can you see that, Councillor Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the proposal will be that the recommendation to submission 587 would be a change, a recommendation from no change recommended to a change recommended. But it would all depend. It would be to change that land from as its current status to G1. But again, because we're dealing only with your notice of motion, with that piece of information in your mind, would you be happy to accept the Chief Executive's recommendation with regards to your notice of motion of no change recommended, but that the land indicated on the map would be subject to, in the interest of proper planning or proposed proper planning, that parcel of land G1 designation would be expanded, and that instead of the parcel of land that you're talking about. Am I correct in that?
Correct, Chair, yes.
Is that clear, Councillor Smith?
Yeah.
And are you happy to accept the Chief Executive's recommendation?
No, because
Okay.
I don't really, no, stick with that one.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's all. Okay, so we go back to the discussion purely on notice of motion 3 now. So as amended. So Councillor Smith has laid her position. It's with regards to the community land, community infrastructure designation, as amended. So we bring Councillor Tobin in, and no change recommended. Recommendation from the Chief Executive.
Thanks, Cahir. I'm just wondering why you would change what's going on with the zoning here. I'm presuming it's zoning for the sake of zoning, as the proposal is to dezone it, and that possibly the owner is looking at it at some sort of zoning being better than no zoning, if you like, on it.
I think just for clarity, I think in fairness to Councillor Smith, she did say that she feels that there's a deficit of G2 zoning or G1 zoning, and that this is an appropriate zoning. That is in her statement.
G1 community infrastructure.
So any speculation outside that is not, it can't be made here.
Well, just on the other motion that you spoke about, at least there is an existing nursing home there, and the potential for jobs to be created locally, and for the local businesses to be able to supply into that and everything else. It makes much more sense that the other area would be zoned appropriately, because you have the existing business there. The other plot of land, I believe, is zoned since possibly 1999 or something like that. So they've had 22 years to try to do something with it and have failed to do anything with it at all. I don't think there was any planning permissions came into it at all. But where it is as well, it's creating sprawl. If something does go on it, I would have said that the appropriate piece there, that if Gormanston Camp was to be F1, and we were looking for pitches and extra bits and pieces like that F1 would be a better zoning for that particular section, and that you could then guarantee that you would have an area for recreational space for potential pitches if they'd fit in. It's very small. I'm just not sure what the orientation of it is, but I know there's three. What's the size of it? Sorry,
it's 2.42 hectares.
2.42 hectares. So you could fit 2 pitches in, possibly junior pitches maybe, but that would be a better zoning for it, and that the potential, as I say, for jobs and everything else would be down beside where the existing nursing home is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Cahir, and thank you, speakers. It's been an interesting bit. I suppose when I look at motion 5 A7 or submission, which is going to come up. You know, it's fairly detailed, there's 6 paragraphs, and we kind of know what the person wants. I'm just going to ask that maybe when Amanda is talking at the end, could she give some detail as to what, if her motion was to pass, she and sees happening on the site? Because if she knows, and maybe she doesn't, does she know if the landowner is open to this zoning? Is he open to pitches, or what kind of thing is going to happen? It's just because when we're comparing two, and we can read in detail maybe on the other one what's planned. So maybe if she could go into some detail on them, it might be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just unsure that that is something that we as elected members could have the that level of detail with regards to it when there's no, and anything may be deemed to be speculation again, because there's no formal submission. And I don't think at any stage did we really pose such a question to other people while we were discussing the use of the land. Now, Councillor Smith is free to answer that, but I don't think it is appropriate that we would be asking her, because we don't know. It's not our land. It's our, none of this land is our land. If it is our land, we shouldn't be in this room. So that is something that's so. Let's just keep it to our function. Thank you, Councillor Toll. Councillor.
Thanks, Caherlock. I'm struggling with this because, to be fair, the G1, and there's a huge amount of G1 community infrastructure highlighted there on the map, but it's not being used by the community. It is essentially now a private commercial development, other than the school. And I wonder, would Councillor Smith, or would it be possible to put in an objective to identify lands that could be used by community? Because we can't just zone a piece of land that's outside the boundary of the village as the boundary stands, and have that that split up of just picking a piece of land there outside of it. I wonder, could we come to some sort of quick arrangement that perhaps we have an objective or a commitment from the planning team to identify land with landowners in relation to proper community use, because to be fair, that community land is now privately owned and a commercial development, and nobody can even get a walk in. So we do need to address that deficit.
Okay, thank you.
Albeit, I think the population is just over 300 in Gormanston. However, look, we need to do something, but it's a bit of a jump to just pick a piece of land and pick a zoning.
Okay, thank you very much. So Councillor Tolan has made a suggestion there. I don't know if that's something that would be amenable to Councillor Smith and to planning, that we just insert an objective. I don't know if that's a formal proposal and a formal amendment, that we'd insert an objective to identify lands for the appropriate community use. Councillor Smith, for your last time coming in this time, we're going to move to a vote. So, Councillor Smith.
Well, Councillor Tolan is 100% correct there. That big, massive amount of community zoned land isn't for the community. And this site it would be an opportunity maybe for G1 community, and I would ask the members to please support it if they could. Thank you.
Okay, so we move to a vote now. Councillor Tobin, we have the councillor who moved the motion. The councillor who moved the motion is asked to move the motion.
But we're being asked to vote for
land
to be used for the community. What kind of use for the community is my question?
No. Can I just, Councillor, just hold on a second. The motion, as read, if you had just throw your eye across it. G1 community infrastructure. That's what the motion is. That's what the motion is requesting. That's it. Okay, so if you could just take down your hand, like as per any
just to clarify.
Yes, Councillor.
Just to clarify, like that could be a creche. Like, it's not necessarily a football pitch. So we just do need to acknowledge that.
But we are aware of that. That's the G1 designation. Everybody who has.
I don't think everybody's aware of that.
Well, anybody who's not aware of it should indicate that they're not aware of it now. And I think if they aren't aware of it, we've been zoning land for the last 6 months nearly. If you're not aware of what you're zoning, then that's not something for us to be starting to talk about now. So Councillor Tobin, that's it for each councillor to look into their own heart, Councillor Tobin. And that's that. So we're going to move to a vote. And the vote is, are we in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation as presented by Padraig and the Planning Department? And by doing so, you are, and if you are in agreement with it, then obviously indicate that through agreement. If you are not in agreement, then you are, maybe we go, do we need to, is this, no. Then if you are not in agreement, then you are in favour of the motion, which is to rezone that land G1 as amended, motion as amended. So I think we should go to a roll call vote because it does relate to land, and to be consistent, we're going to go to that. So everybody clear on what it is you're being asked to vote on? Anybody not clear? Everybody understand? Okay, so I'll hand you over to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I hope you can hear me. Okay, good. Thank you. Councillor Adanuga, I think, is absent. Councillor Behan.
Agree.
Councillor Bonner.
I want to vote for the motion as amended.
Okay, you're against the Chief Executive.
That will be disagree.
Disagree. Thank you. Councillor Bray.
Just hold on a second. I'll give you a bus back there. We're doing the vote here now, and I'm getting a bit lost whether they're
Councillor O'Connor, can you turn off your microphone, please? Councillor Bray. Councillor Bray, I'm marking Councillor Bray as absent. Councillor Cassidy.
Great.
Councillor Dean is not present. Councillor Dempsey.
Agree.
Councillor Drew. Councillor Drew, present. I don't see him. I'm recording him as absent. Councillor Fennessy is absent. Councillor Fitzgerald is absent. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Agree.
Councillor Fox.
Agree.
Councillor French.
Agree.
Councillor Gallagher.
Disagree.
Councillor Garrity Smith. Sorry, Councillor.
Agree.
Thank you. Councillor Gilroy.
Agree.
Councillor Golden is absent. Councillor Harding.
Agree.
Councillor Jamal.
Agree.
Councillor Keogan.
Disagree.
Thank you. Councillor Killian.
Disagree.
Councillor Laws is absent. Councillor McCabe.
Agree.
Councillor McGinty is not present. Councillor McKee is absent. Councillor Mead.
Agree.
Councillor Moore is absent. Councillor Murphy.
Agree.
Councillor O'Connor.
Agree.
Councillor O'Neill is absent. Councillor O'Reilly.
Disagree.
Councillor Sarah Riley.
Agree.
Councillor Tommy Riley is absent. Councillor Smith.
Disagree.
Councillor Sewin.
Agree.
Councillor Tobin. Councillor Tobin. Is Councillor Tobin with us? I'm going to come back to Councillor Tobin. Councillor Tobin. Councillor Tobin is absent. Councillor Tolan.
Agree.
Councillor Toole.
Agree.
Councillor Tormey. Councillor Tormey with us. I'm recording Councillor Tormey as absent. And Councillor Tobin. Are you with us?
Robert, he just rang in his vote. He lost connection there. Audrey's coming into you.
Okay, I'm just getting a phone vote from Councillor Tobin. Okay, Councillor Tobin is agreeing. We got that vote via the phone. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, members. So it's 19 are in agreement, 6 disagreement, 15 absent. So the motion falls. So we move on now to the submissions for Gormanston. Sean.
Thank you, Cahirlock. From the submissions relation to Gormanston, 8 submissions received, 8 where no change has been recommended. Thank you.
Okay, and just for clarification, because we had been discussing submission 587, that was contingent on the provision of G1 lands. How does that stand now? Does that proposed recommended change stand?
No, I suppose that recommendation was made on the basis that these were more appropriate to put G1 lands rather than where Councillor Smith was placing them. Chief Executive's recommendation is to remain as no change. However, it's up to the members if they want to amend that decision. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm just going to, Councillor Mead, you have the law of Suez there.
Sorry, yes, I was going to say that I would propose that we do amend 587, that we do go with the change that was spoken about.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that proposal?
Seconded, yeah.
Who's that?
Michael Gallagher, yeah.
Councillor Gallagher. So we'll take the proposed change first, just for clarity while we're talking about it. So that there's one. So we'll take that separately. We'll take that separately, okay? So we're going to go. So there's 7 for no change recommended. So can we get a proposal for no change recommended?
Proposed.
Councillor
Sharon
Tolan,
Tolan.
seconded.
Seconded. Tom Behan.
Thomas Behan. So we go back to the voting screen, please. So if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation on the no change recommended on 7 of those motions as outlined, please indicate that now. If you could lower your hands, please, members. Councillor Tolan. If you're not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation as per the 7 submissions, please indicate that now. Thank you. So that's 16 in favour, no one against. So if we could just bring up submission 587. So as please.
Okay, here, look, we just need to seek clarity as well from Councillor Mead regarding the zoning he wishes to put on it. Is it G1 or F1? Thank you.
Okay, so as per, just if we get a high, if we could just see the if we could see the submission and that would be, we could discuss that then. So it's G1, is it?
Oh. Apologies, sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, submission, here, like that's the submission there in front of you, and the submission required for them to be changed to G1 community infrastructure lands.
Okay, so Councillor Mead has proposed that we change submission 587, seconded by Councillor Michael Gallagher. So that's voting that's at odds with the Chief Executive's recommendation. So we'll need to go to a roll call vote on this. Councillor Mead.
If I could just speak shortly, very briefly.
Sorry, well, we had quite, okay, if we can keep it, yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So as we discussed in the last motion, there may be a need for G1 zoning in the area. And if you accept that premise, as was discussed in the last motion, this is in a better location. It would feel, well, some would feel this is in a better location. So that's basically the logic behind it. Thank you.
Okay, I think the word was more appropriate than that. I didn't say it was. I think the exact word that Patrick had used was that it's a more appropriate site. I don't think he was indicating that there was a need for it. So it's just something. Maybe Patrick might come in on that as well. Just to make sure I haven't offered an incorrect summary of what he had said.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Correct, the wording was it would be more appropriate on the basis that it's adjacent to an existing G1 zoning. And in the interests of consistency, we had said no originally. And that's why I was saying that the Chief Executive's view on NOM 3 was no. So it arises now, I suppose, we brought it up in light of the fact that there was identified through the conversation of the members a need for F1 or G1 zoning, and it was considered that this was a more appropriate one. I would say that any addition will obviously have to be environmentally assessed through the SEA process, but ultimately we will accept that this is a more appropriate location. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to a vote. It's going to be a roll call vote. We're going to go to Councillor Paddy Mead. You're quite clear. And is anybody not clear on the reasoning and the rationale behind why we are doing, why Councillor Mead believes this to be something that should be done? Anybody? Councillor Smith?
No, could I just say that site wouldn't be big enough. It's on a hill and it's right beside a quarry.
But
So
it's
just
not.
if that makes any change, I don't know.
But I suppose just again, it's big enough for what? If we don't know what it's going to be used for, we're just changing the zoning.
Is it for the same size?
No, it's just that piece of land.
Okay, okay.
Okay, thank you. So anybody unclear as to what it is you're going to be asked? So you're going to be asked, first of all, you're going to be asked, are you in favour of the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change recommended of submission 587? If you are in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, express as you might think appropriately, agree. If you're not in favour of the Chief Executive's recommendation and in fact in agreement with Councillor Mead's motion, then you disagree with the Chief Executive's recommendation. Everybody clear on that? Anybody not clear on that? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. I'll hand you over to Robert.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Councillor Adenuga is not present. Councillor Behan.
Agree.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner.
Agree.
Councillor Bray is not present. Councillor Cassidy.
Agree.
Councillor Dean is not present. Councillor Dempsey.
Agree.
I'm taking that as agree, Councillor. Yes?
Agree. Yeah. Agree.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Drew. Councillor Drew with us. Okay, I'm recording Councillor Drew as absent. Councillor Fennessy is absent. Councillor Fitzgerald is absent. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Agree.
Councillor Fox.
I disagree.
Councillor French.
Agree.
Councillor Gallagher.
Disagree.
Councillor Gertie Smith.
Agree.
Councillor Gilroy.
Agree.
Councillor Golden is absent. Councillor Harding. Councillor Harding is recording. Councillor Harding is absent. Councillor Jamal.
Agree.
Councillor Keoghan. Councillor Keoghan. I'll come back to Councillor Keoghan. Councillor Killian. Councillor Killian. I might come back to Councillor Killian. Councillor Laws is absent. Councillor McCabe.
Agree.
Councillor McGinty is absent. Councillor McKee is absent. Councillor Mead.
Disagree.
Councillor Moore is absent. Councillor Murphy.
Agree.
Councillor O'Connor. Councillor O'Connor.
Disagree.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill is absent. Councillor O'Reilly.
Agree.
Councillor Sarah Riley.
I'll be honest here. I'm confused as to which is which, and I have been listening. I know I couldn't see him on the screen, but I have been listening. if I vote disagree, am I voting in favour of the zoning as proposed by Paddy Mead?
Yes.
Again, we shouldn't be asking questions in the middle of a vote. You know,
But I didn't. There was no
so-
point coming in. This discussion's been going on in our
Yeah,
in
yeah.
our
So,
group.
so okay. So you are being asked, as always, are you in agreement with the chief executive's recommendation?
Is the chief executive's recommendation then to change the zoning?
The chief
As per
executive's
Paddy
recommendation?
Mead?
No, it's not. The chief executive's recommendation remains the same.
Okay, well then disagree.
Councillor Fox.
I'm fully aware of what's going on and I know what I'm doing, but I think some members are not. In my opinion, if I say disagree, I'm voting for Councillor Mead's motion, but I think some members are not clear on that. It's my opinion. Now I'm perfectly clear on what I'm doing.
Okay.
But I think it's my opinion that some members are not clear on what they're doing.
Okay, so I'm just, as with every vote that we have had, we have been, as the chief executive's recommendation has been outlined, unless there's been a change to chief executive's recommendation. There's a bit of an echo there somewhere. I'm wondering if, and this is in the middle of a vote. This is inappropriate. We're not. This is in the middle of a vote. So we're going to Councillor Tobin. If you could just take your hand down for a second, please. We're in the middle of a vote, and it's not in order to be having this conversation. To be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah,
So,
agreed.
you know, so we're going to continue the way it is.
Yeah.
If you're unsure, you can abstain. So it's not appropriate to be discussing them. Once the vote is cast, the vote is started. The vote is started. The time before every motion, every time we go to vote, I put the question: does everyone understand what's going on? Everybody understand what's been said, and that is the time to raise it. So we're going to progress with the vote here and see how that vote goes, as we do every other time, every 2,000 other votes that we've had. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. So I've registered Councillor Sarah Riley as disagreeing with the Chief Executive's recommendation. Councillor Tommy Riley is not present. Councillor Amanda Smith.
Agree.
Councillor Suhan.
Disagree.
Councillor Tobin.
Disagree.
Councillor Tobin. Councillor Tobin. I'm recording Councillor Tobin as absent. Councillor Tolan.
I'm going to abstain because I know what we're doing. I just don't know why we're doing it.
Councillor Toole.
Disagree.
Councillor Tormey. Recording Councillor Tormey is absent, and I'm going to return to Councillor Keogan.
So I agree. Agree.
Agree. Thank you. Councillor Killian.
Agree.
Thank you.
Councillor Tobin, you look like a man with a question on his mind.
Just a query, and I think it's the source of possibly the confusion. When Park was talking there about the zoning of it, I was under the assumption that the CE report was stating that that particular zoning would happen. But I think in the vote, and I hope I'm right in what I voted for, that in disagreeing, that was essentially allowing for that particular section beside the nursing home to be zoned.
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah, correct.
So,
Yeah.
and then just to recap, Councillor Mead had, we as always, we put a submission. We usually vote on the submission in groups. On this occasion, Councillor Mead had indicated that there was a strong need for additional zoning of G1 land in Gormanston and to support particular zoning for the reasons that the submission was obviously given, not because it was a chance to grab a bit of land off the executive. It seemed to be sneak in a bit of extra G1 zoning somewhere. It's in. He says he and as is his right to support submission 587. Now, the recommendation, as was requested before we went, because it had been raised, I went back to the planning department, asked them what the position was, and in the context of the vote, the recommendation remained the same, which is no change recommended. Where the confusion may have happened was when we closed out, and we had fully closed out the discussion on notice of motion 3, it had come up during the course of the discussion that there may be an opportunity to, if it was deemed to be more appropriate to zone lands as identified in 587, rather than the lands identified under Councillor Smith's notice of motion 3. But not to say that it was the thing to do, it was more appropriate. So I feel that it was an attempt during the course of that conversation. That conversation was closed out, and then we restarted a fresh conversation, as we always do when we transition from the notice of motions to the submissions. The submission, when we went, Councillor Meade identified the possibility here on 587 that there might be some a change of heart. We asked for clarification from the planning department. The planning department were quite clear to say that there was no change recommended once we got to the submissions, and that's what was put to the floor. And Councillor Meade wanted to change. I wanted to vote against the Chief Executive's recommendations. That's why we went to the written vote, or to the roll call vote. And that, I understand where the confusion may have had, but if you were following the chain of events, which may have got a little bit, maybe it may not have been clear to some. I feel it was, but the time to register your lack of clarity was not during the vote. As with always, is the time to identify your lack of clarity was when you're asked, is everyone clear? So now, once that vote has voted in the time, Councillor Riley.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to apologise for my querying in the middle of the vote, but my doubt as to the way I was voting actually arose during the course of the actual voting. Whether how I was voting was how I intended to vote. So again, look, I apologise, but my time of doubt occurred after the voting and the way people were voting. But yeah, look,
we all have moments of doubt, probably more than 5 times a day. But in this, for me anyway. But look, we can't ask questions during the course of that's the most important part. Once we start the vote, we cannot seek clarification during the course of the vote. So the outcome is one abstention. So it's 15 in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, 8 in disagreement, 1 abstention, and 16 absent. So the Chief Executive's recommendation carries. No change recommended. Okay, and that closes the rather complicated chapter on Gormanston. It's quite comparable to how long we spent talking about Navan as we spent talking about Gormanston, but it's an important part of the county. And now we move on to Julianstown. So we get the overview of Julianstown, please.
Yes, thank you, Cahir. Look, I'll just get the zoning map for Julianstown up on screen. So as per the written statement for Julianstown, the development strategy is to consolidate and strengthen the commercial and residential village centre of Julianstown and promote the future development of the village as a compact settlement with a pedestrian-friendly environment. Residential development has taken place to the north and south of the river in the 2 areas I'm circling there. There is from the point of view of residential zoning, there are 2 areas zoned A2 residential, which I'm highlighting there. There is also a proposal to add additional A2 residential on this narrow strip here, and that is as per submission 869, and that is on the basis of a recent grant of permission for 21 units. So it is proposed to add an A2 residential zoning in there on the basis of a recent permission. The A2 sites are both infill sites, as I'm identifying there, so that will help fulfill the objective of achieving a compact settlement. New residential development has not been accompanied by the provision of the necessary employment, retail and community facilities required to serve the community. So lands have been identified within the core of the village for B1 village centre land use zoning objectives. So it is these lands here. So they are identified for redevelopment, and that is the old Mill Hotel. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. We just go to Sean for the overview of notice of motions and submissions, please.
Thanks, Cahir. Look, a very quick overview on this one. There were 5 submissions, 4 no change recommended, 1 where a change recommended, and 1 where there's a notice of motion within the book. Thank you.
Okay, so there's no notice of motions from the floor. No. So we go to Councillor McKee. 176. We have Councillor McKee, you present? If we could go to the voting page as we know it locally. Councillor McKee, you just give him another minute. He's not present. If he's not present, he hasn't indicated that he has anybody nominated formally to move this motion for him. So we're going to move to a fall. It's going to fall now in 1 second. Councillor McKee is not here. Has anybody said that Councillor McKee? There's no indication from anyone here that Councillor McKee is trying to call in. Okay, no indication. Okay, so we move that Councillor McKee is not here and hasn't identified a proxy, I suppose, in writing. So that notice Councillor McKee falls. We move on to the submissions. Sean?
Thanks, Cahir. Like there are 5 submissions, 4 no change recommended and 1 with a change recommended.
So we propose it for the 5 changes recommended. Sorry, 4 no change recommended. If we go back to the main screen, please.
Proposed.
Proposed, Councillor Behan, seconded. Councillor Tolan, thank you. So if we've going to be asked if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change recommended, please indicate that now. It's agreement with that now, please. Thank you. If you lower your hands, please. And if you're not in agreement with Chief Executive's recommendation for no change recommended, please indicate that now. Councillor Mead, thank you.
Just in relation
Councillor Mead, we're in a vote. Thank you very much. We're in a vote. Again, we've just literally had this conversation, Councillor, are you indicating that you're not in agreement?
With 781, not all.
781. Okay, so Mark, Councillor Mead's disagreement with no change recommended, or with no change recommended for 781. Thank you. So that's 14 in favour and 1 against that, and that particular submission is 781. Thank you. So then we move on to the 1 change recommended. If we have a proposer and seconder for 1 change recommended. Can we have a proposer? Who's that proposer? Councillor Behan, we seconder. We seconder for this, please.
Councillor Toole.
Councillor Toole, thank you. So if we're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation of 1 change recommended for 1 submission, please indicate that now. Okay, if you lower your hand, please. If you are not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation on that 1 change, please indicate that now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Look, did you get
12,
my vote there? Sorry, I was late.
You indicated that you weren't in favour, Councillor.
I indicated that I wasn't.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you are in favour, so that's.
Okay.
Okay, we have recommended that. Okay, we've seen that. So that is 13 to no 0. I just would remind there are a number of councillors present. We're going down and further down with regards to the actual participation in the votes now. So it might just be. I would be fearful that we might drop below a quorum and we might have to park the meeting. So it is important that we participate in the votes, and that if you are present, that you leave your camera on, and if you're not present, that you know, it's starting to get down low near the quorum levels here. So we need to keep our level of engagement a lot consistent and correct, or we're going to start. Sorry, Councillor? So it's just the engagement. I understand people are getting tired, but if we drop below 11, we have no quorum, we can make no decision. If that's what people want, by all means. But once we drop below 11, this meeting ends and it moves on till tomorrow. Thank you. That closes Julian.